Sir Eustace Grey by George Crabbe. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sean Kilpatrick. Sir Eustace Grey by Reverend George Crabbe. Scene: a madhouse. Persons: visitor, physician, and patient. Visitor:
I'll know no more. The heart is torn. By views of woe we cannot heal. Long shall I see these things forlorn, and oft again their griefs shall feel, as each upon the mind shall steal. That wan projector's mystic style, that lumpish idiot leering by, that peevish idler's ceaseless while, and that poor maiden's half-formed smile, while struggling for the full-drawn sigh. I'll know no more.
Physician: Yes, turn again, then speed to happier scenes thy way, when thou hast viewed what yet remain the ruins of Sir Eustace Grey, the sport of madness, misery's prey. But he will no historian need, his cares, his crimes will he display, and show as one from frenzy freed the proud lost mind, the rash done deed. That still to him is Grayling Hall. Approach, he'll bid thee welcome there, will sometimes for his servant call, and sometimes point the vacant chair. He can, with free and easy air, appear attentive and polite, can veil his woes in manners fair, and pity with respect excite. Patient: Who comes? Approach, 'tis kindly done, my learned physician, and a friend their pleasures is quite, to visit one who cannot to their ease attend, nor joys bestow, nor comforts lend, as when I lived to bless so well, and dreamt not I must soon contend with those malignant powers of hell. Physician: Less warmth, Sir Eustace, or we go. Patient: See, I am calm as infant love, a very child, but one of woe, whom you should pity, not reprove. But men at ease, who never strove with passions wild, will calmly show how soon we may their ills remove, and masters of their madness grow. Some 20 years, I think, are gone. Time flies, I know not how, away. The sun upon no happier shone, nor prouder man than Eustace Grey. Ask where you would, and all would say the man admired and praised of all, by rich and poor, by grave and gay, was the young lord of Grayling Hall. Yes, I had youth and rosy health, was nobly formed, as man might be, for sickness then. Of all my wealth I never gave a single fee. The ladies fair, the maidens free, were all accustomed then to say, who would a handsome figure see, should look upon Sir Eustace Grey. He had a frank and pleasant look, a cheerful eye and accent bland. His speech and manner spoke the generous heart, the open hand. About him all was gay and grand. He had the praise of great and small. He bought, improved, projected, planned, and reigned a prince at Grayling Hall. My lady, she was all we love. All praise to speak her worth is faint. Her manners showed the yielding dove, her morals the seraphic saint. She never breathed nor looked complaint. No equal upon earth had she. Now, what is this fair thing I paint? Alas, as all that live shall be. Worms, doctor, worms, and so are we. There was, beside, a gallant youth, and him my bosom's friend I had. Oh, I was rich in very truth. It made me proud, it made me mad. Yes, I was lost, but there was cause. Where stood my tale I cannot find, but I had all mankind's applause, and all the smiles of womankind. There were 2 cherub things beside, a gracious girl, a glorious boy, yet more to swell my full-blown pride, to varnish higher my fading joy. Pleasures were ours without alloy, nay, paradise, till my frail Eve our bliss was tempted to destroy, deceived and fated to deceive. But I deserved, for all that time, when I was loved, admired, caressed, there was within each secret crime, unfelt, uncancelled, unconfessed. I never then my God addressed, in grateful praise or humble prayer, and if his word was not my jest, dread thought, it never was my care. I doubted, fool I was to doubt, if that all-piercing eye could see, if he who looks all worlds throughout would so minute and careful be as to perceive and punish me. With man I would be great and high, but with my God so lost that he in his large view should pass me by. Thus blessed with children, friend, and wife, blessed far beyond the vulgar lot of all that gladdens human life, where was the good that I had not? But my vile heart had sinful spot, and heaven beheld its deepening stain. Eternal justice I forgot, and mercy sought not to obtain. Come near, I'll softly speak the rest. Alas, 'tis known to all the crowd, her guilty love was all confessed, and his, who so much truth avowed, my faithless friends. In pleasure proud I sat when these cursed tidings came. Their guilt, their flight was told aloud, and envy smiled to hear my shame. I called on vengeance, at the word she came. Can I the deed forget? I held the sword, the accursed sword, the blood of his false heart made wet. And that fair victim paid her price. She pined, she died, she loathed to live. I saw her dying, see her yet. Fair fallen thing, my rage forgive. Those cherubs still my life to bless were left. Could I my fears remove? Sad fears that checked each fond caress and poisoned all parental love. Yet that with jealous feelings strove, and would at last have won my will, had I not, wretch, been doomed to prove the extremes of mortal good and ill. In youth, health, joy, and beauty's pride, they drooped as flowers when blighted bough. The dire infected came, they died, and I was cursed as I am now. Nay, frown not, angry friend, allow that I was deeply, sorely tried. Here then, and you must wonder how I could such storms and strifes abide. Storms, not that clouds embattled make, when they afflict this earthly globe, but such as with their terrors shake man's breast, and to the bottom probe, they make the hypocrite disrobe. They try us all, if false or true, for this one devil had power on Job, and I was long the slave of two. Physician, peace, peace, my friend, these subjects fly, collect thy thoughts, go calmly on. Patient, and shall I then the fact deny? I was, thou knowest, I was begone, like him who filled the eastern throne, to whom the watcher cried aloud, that royal wretch of Babylon, who was so guilty and so proud. Like him, with haughty, stubborn mind, I in my state, my comforts sought, delight and praise I hoped to find in what I builded, planted, bought. O arrogance by misery taught! Soon came a voice, I felt it come, full be his cup with evil fraught, demons his guides, and death his doom. Then was I cast from out my state. Two fiends of darkness led my way. They waked me early, watched me late, my dread by night, my plague by day. Oh, I was made their subject, their play, through many a stormy, troubled year. And how they used their passive prey is sad to tell, but you shall hear. And first before they sent me forth through this unpitying world to run, they robbed Sir Eustace of his worth, lands, manors, lordships, every one. So was that gracious man undone, was spurred as vile, was scorned as poor, whom every former friend would shun, and menials drove from every door. Then those ill-favored ones, whom none but my unhappy eyes could view, led me with wild emotion on, and with resistless terror drew. Through lands we fled, o'er seas we flew, and halted on a boundless plain, where nothing fed, nor breathed, nor grew, but silence ruled the still domain. Upon that boundless plain, below, the setting sun's last rays were shed, and gave a mild and sober glow, where all were still, asleep or dead. Vast ruins in the mists were spread, pillars and pediments sublime, where the grey moss had formed a bed, and clothed the crumbling spoils of time. There was I fixed, I know not how, condemned for untold years to stay. Yet years were not, one dreaded now, endured no change of night or day. The same mild evening's sleeping ray shone softly, solemn, and serene. In all that time I gazed away, the setting sun's sad rays were seen. At length a moment's sleep stole on. Again came my commission's foes. Again through sea and land were gone. No peace, no respite, no repose. Above the dark, broad sea we rose. We ran through bleak and frozen land. I had no strength, their strength to pose, an infant in a giant's hand. They placed me where those streamers play, those nimble beams of brilliant light. It would the stoutest heart dismay to see, to feel that dreadful sight. So swift, so pure, so cold, so bright, they pierced my frame with icy wound. And all that half-year's polar night, those dancing streamers wrapped me round. Slowly that darkness passed away. When down upon the earth I fell, some hurried sleep was mine by day, but soon as tolled the evening bell, they forced me on, wherever dwell far distant men in cities fair, cities of whom no travelers tell, nor feet but mine were wanderers there. Their watchmen stare and stand aghast, as on we hurry through the dark. The watchlight blinks as we go past, the watchdog shrinks and fears to bark. The watchtower's bell sounds shrill and hark. The free wind blows, we've left the town, a wide sepulchre, ground I mark, and on the tombstone place me down. What monuments of mighty dead, what tombs of various kind are found, in stones erect their shadows shed on humble graves with wickers bound. Some risen fresh above the ground, some level with the native clay. What sleeping millions await the sound? Arise, ye dead, and come away. Alas, they stay not for that call. Spare me this woe, ye demons, spare the shrouded shadows all. 'Tis more than mortal brain can bear. Rustling they rise, they sternly glare at man upheld by vital breath. Who, led by wicked fiends, shall dare to join the shadowy troops of death? Yes, I have felt all men can feel. 'Tis he shall pay his nature's debt, ills that no hope has strength to heal, no mind the comfort to forget, whatever cares the heart can fret. The spirit swear, the temper gal, woe, want, dread, anguish, all beset my sinful soul, together all. Those fiends upon a shaking fen fixed me in dark tempestuous night. There never trod the foot of men, there flocked the fall in wintry flight. There danced the moor's deceitful light above the pool where sedges grow, and when the morning sun shone bright, it shone upon a field of snow. They hung me on a bough so small the rock could build her nest no higher. They fixed me on the trembling ball that crowns the steeple's quivering spire. They set me where the seas retire, but drown with their returning tide, and made me flee the mountain's fire when rolling from its burning side. I've hung upon the ridgy steep of cliffs and held the rambling briar. I've plunged below the billowy deep where air was sent to me respire. I've been where hungry wolves retire, and to complete my woes I've ran where Bedlam's crazy crew conspire against the life of reasoning man. I've furled in storms the flapping sail by hanging from the topmast head. I've served the vilest slaves in jail and picked the dunghill's spoil for bread. I've made the badger's hole my bed. I've wandered with a gypsy crew. I've dreaded all the guilty dread and done what they would fear to do. On sand where ebbs and flows the flood, midday they placed and bade me die. Propped on my staff I stoutly stood when the swift waves came rolling by, and high they rose, and still more high. To my lips drank the bitter brine. I sobbed convulsed, then cast mine eye, and saw the tides reflowing sign. And then my dreams were sought as naught could yield but my unhappy case. I've been of thousand devils caught, and thrust into that horrid place where reign dismay, despair, disgrace. Furies with iron fangs were there to torture that accursed race, doomed to dismay, disgrace, despair. Harmless I was, yet hunted down for treasons to my soul unfit. I've been pursued through many a town for crimes that petty knaves commit. I've been adjudged to have lost my wit, because I preached so loud and well, and thrown into the dungeon's pit, for trampling on the pit of hell. Such were the evils, man, of sin, that I was fated to sustain, and add to all without, within, a soul defiled with every stain, that man's reflecting mind can pain. Such were the evils, man, of sin, that I was fated to sustain, and add to all without, within, a soul defiled with every stain, that man's reflecting mind can pain, that pride, wrong, rage, despair can make. In fact,
They nearly touched my brain, and reason on her throne would shake, but pity will the vilest seek if punished. Guilt will not repine. I heard a heavenly teacher speak, and felt the sun of mercy shine. I hailed the light, the birth divine, and then was sealed among the few. Those angry fiends beheld the sign, and from me in an instant flew. Come hear how thus the charmers cry to wandering sheep, the strays of sin, while some the wicket gate pass by, and some will knock and enter in. Full joyful 'tis a soul to win, for he that winneth souls is wise. Now hark, the holy strains begin, and thus the sainted preacher cries. Pilgrim, brethren, with thy sin, come the way to Zion's gate. There till mercy let thee in. Knock and weep and watch and wait. Knock, he knows the sinner's cry. Weep, he loves the mourner's tears. Watch, for saving grace is nigh. Wait till heavenly light appears. Hark, it is the bridegroom's voice. Welcome, pilgrim, to thy rest. Now within the gate rejoice, safe and sealed and bought and blessed, safe from all those lures of vice, sealed by signs the chosen know, bought by love and life, the price, bless the mighty debt of woe. Holy pilgrim, what for thee in a world like this remain? From thy guarded breast shall flee fear and shame, and doubt and pain. Fear, the hope of heaven shall fly. Shame, from glory's view retire. Doubt, in certain rapture die. Pain, in endless bliss expire. But though my day of grace was come, yet still my days of grief I find. The former clouds collected gloom still sadden the reflecting mind. The soul to evil things consigned will of their evil some retain. The man will seem to earth inclined, and will not look erect again. Thus, though elect, I feel it hard to lose what I possessed before. To be from all my wealth debarred, the brave Sir Eustace is no more. But old I wax, and passing poor. Stern rugged men my conduct view. They chide my wish, they bar my door. 'Tis hard I weep, you see I do. Must you, my friends, no longer stay? Thus quickly all my pleasures end? But I'll remember when I pray my kind physician and his friend. In those sad hours you deign to spend with me, I shall requite them all. Sir Eustace for his friends shall send, and thank their love at Graham Hall. Visitor. The poor Eustace, yet his hope leads him to think of joys again, and when his earthly visions droop, his views of heavenly kind remain. But whence that meek and humble strain? That spirit wounded, lost, resigned, would not so proud a soul disdain the madness of the poorest mind. Physician. No, for the more he swelled with pride, the more he felt misfortune's blow, disgrace and grief he could not hide, and poverty had laid him low. The shame and sorrow, working slow, at length his humble spirit gave madness on those began to grow, and bound him to his fiends a slave. Though the wild thoughts had touched his brain, then was he free, so forth he ran, to soothe or threat, alike were vain. He spake of fiends, looked wild and wan. Year after year, the hurried man obeyed those fiends from place to place, till his religious change began to form a frenzied child of grace. For as the fury lost its strength, the mind reposed. By slow degrees came lingering hope, and brought at length to the tormented spirit ease. This slave of sin, whom fiends could seize, fell to believe their power had end. 'Tis faith, he cried, my bosom frees, and now my Saviour is my friend. But though time can yield relief, and soften woes it cannot cure, would we not suffer pain and grief to have our reason sound and sure? Then let us keep our bosoms pure, our fancy's favourite flights suppress, prepare the body to endure, and bend the mind to meet distress, and then his guardian care implore, whom demons dread and men adore. End of Sir Eustace Grey by George Crabbe.
The Stone Dog by Charles G.D. Roberts. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rebecca Granston. The Stone Dog by Charles G.D. Roberts. It was drawing towards sunset, and I had reached the outskirts of the city, which here came to an abrupt end upon the very edge of the marshes. The marshes stretched before me bare and grey, with here and there a flush of evening colour, serving but to emphasise their utterness of desolation. Here and there, also, lay broad pools, their shore and water gradually intermerging through a sullen fringe of reeds. The river had been my day-long companion, a noisy stream flowing through breezy hills and villages and vineyards, having loitered to draw its circle about the city walls, had fallen under a spell. It met me here a featureless, brimming ditch, and wound away in torpid coils to the monotonous horizon. And now this sunken city, its edges dead and fallen to decay, these naked levels, where not even a bitten's voice had courage to startle the stillness, filled me, in spite of myself, with a vague apprehensiveness. Just as one who is groping in profound darkness feels his eyes dilate in the effort to catch the least glimmer of light, I found my senses all on the strain, attentive to their very utmost. Though the atmosphere was heavy and deadening, my eyes were so watchful that not even the uprising of some weeds, trodden down perhaps hours before by a passing foot, escaped their notice. My nostrils were keenly conscious of the sick metallic odour from the marshes, of the pleasanter perfume of dry reed panicles, of the chill, damp smell of mouldering stonework, and of a strangely disagreeable haunting essence from a certain dull-coloured weed, whose leaves, which shot up within tempting reach of my hand, I had idly bruised in passing. My ears, for all their painful expectancy, heard at first no sound save the rustle of a frightened mouse in the dead grass near. But at length they detected the gurgle of running water, made audible by a faint stray wind which breathed in my direction. Instinctively I turned and followed the sound. On my right a huge fragment of the wall jutted into the marsh, and passing this I saw before me, brightened by the sunset, a narrow stretch of dry baked soil, raised somewhat above the level of the pools, and strewn with shattered bricks and scraps of tiling and potsherds. The musical lapsing of the water now fell upon my ears distinctly, and I saw a little way off a quaint old fountain, standing half a stone cast clear of the wall. With the sunlight bathing it, the limpid water sparkling away from its base, it was the only cheerful object in the landscape, yet I felt an unaccountable reluctance to approach it. The evil enchantment which seemed to brood over the place, the weird fantasies chasing each other through my unconsenting brain, annoyed me greatly, for I professed to hold my imagination pretty well under control, and to have but small concern for ghostly horrors. Shaking aside my nervousness, I began to whistle softly as I strolled up to examine the old fountain. But on noticing how lugubrious, how appropriate to the neighbourhood and my feelings was the air that came to my lips, I laughed aloud. At the sudden sound of my voice I felt both startled and somewhat abashed. Laughter here was clearly out of place, and besides, the echo that followed was obtrusively and unpleasantly distinct, appearing to come both from a deep arched doorway in the wall nearby, and from the vaulted hollow of the basin of the fount, which lay just beneath the dog's jaws. As I should have said before, the fountain was a great cube of darkish stone, along the top of which a stone dog crouched, and the water gushed from between its carved forepaws into a deep basin, the side of which was cleft 2/3 of the way to its base. Through this break, which I saw to be an old one from the layers of green film lining it, the stream bubbled out and ran off among barren heaps of debris to sink itself in the weeds of some stagnant pool. The head of the dog was thrust forward and rested upon the forepaws, as if the brute was sleeping, but its half-open eyes seemed to watch the approaches to the doorway in the wall. As a piece of sculpture, the animal was simply marvellous. In its gathered limbs, though relaxed and perfectly at rest, a capacity for swift and terrible actions seemed to hold itself in reserve, and a breath almost appeared to come from the half-open jaws, momentarily dimming the crystal that smoothly gushed beneath. No scrap of vegetation could the rill persuade out of the inexorable sterility around, saving for some curdled greenish mosses that waved slowly from the sides of the basin, or pointed from root-hold on the brick and shard, where the small current loitered a little. I am not a taker of notes, nor, for all my vagrant and exploring tendencies, am I a very close observer. Nevertheless, though it is now 1.5 years since what I am telling of took place, the minutest details of that strange fountain and of the scene about it are as definitely before me as if I had been there but yesterday. I am not going to inflict them all upon my reader, yet would do so without a spark of compunction, if by such means I could dim the all too vivid remembrance. The experiences that befell me by this fountain have shaken painfully the confidence I once enjoyed as to the fullness of my knowledge of the powers of things material. I cannot say that I have become credulous, but I have ceased to regard as necessarily absurd whatever I find it difficult to explain. From the fountain it was not a score of paces to the doorway in the wall, which was sunk below the surface of the ground, so that the crumbling arch surmounting it was scarcely on a level with my feet. Deep narrow stairs of brickwork consisting, I think, of 7 steps led down to it. The doorway had once been elaborately ornamented with mouldings in yellow stucco, most of which had fallen and all but choked the stairs. The crude pale colour of these fragments jarred harshly against the olive of the damp stone foundations and the stained brown of the mouldy brick. After my usual fashion, I set myself to explore this doorway, in my interest half forgetting my apprehensions. As I descended the steps, the sound of the running water faded out, with a suddenness which caught my ear, though failing to fix my attention. But as I made to grasp the great rusty iron door-handle, which was curiously wrought of 2 dragons intertwisted neck and tail, again my every sense sprang to the alert, and a chill of terror crept tingling through my frame. My straining ears could detect not the slightest sound from the fountain, which was within plain view behind me. I felt as if some eye were fixed upon me. I faced sharply about and set foot on the steps to ascend, and I saw the water at that very moment burst forth afresh between the feet of the dog, from whose eye a dull white glow seemed just vanishing. It must be borne in mind that the beast's flank was toward the doorway, and, in consequence, only one of its half-closed eyes visible from where I stood. I ascended and went straight to the fountain. I grasped the great stone head and gave it a wrench, but found it was just as immovable as it looked. Vexed at my idiotic fears, I vowed to take my fill of investigating that doorway, and to find out if there lay anything of interest beyond it. I knew this part of the city was quite deserted, and that no outraged householder in the flesh was likely to confront my trespassings. But the last of the daylight was now upon me, and I thought best to postpone my enterprise till the morrow. As I betook myself back towards humanity and lodgings, I felt that eye piercing me till I rounded the buttress of the wall, but I denied my folly permission to look back. The following morning was spent among the curious old cafes, the unexpected squares, and the gorgeous but dilapidated churches of the inhabited city. All these things, however, failed to interest me. With more time on my hands than I quite knew what to do with, I yet felt as if my time were being wasted. The spell of the dead outskirts, of the shadowless dead marshes, of that mysterious and inscrutable dog, clung to me with unrelenting persistence, and the early afternoon found me standing again by the fountain. Familiarly, I scooped up the cool water and drank it from my palm. I scattered it over the parched bricks and clay, which instantly soaked it in. I dashed a few drops also, playfully, upon the image of the dog, which had taken, the evening before, such fantastic liberties with my overwrought fancy. But these drops gathered themselves up nimbly into little shining balls, and fled off to the ground like so much quicksilver. I looked out upon the wan pools and marshes, whence a greenish mist steamed up, and seemed to poison the sunlight streaming through it. It is possible that this semblance of an unwholesome mist was not so much the fault of the marshes as a condition of the atmosphere, premonitory of the fierce electric storms and the earthquake which visited the city that same night. The greenish light beat full on the sunken doorway, so that only the lowermost steps remained in shadow. However unattractive the temporary complexion of the sun, I was glad of his company as I descended the steps. The twisting dragons of the door-handle attracted me as I drew near. As for the dog, I had exorcised it from my imagination with those nimble drops of water, and for the old door, it looked as if a little persuasion would make it yield whatever secret it might chance to have in keeping. But certainly, if I might credit my ears, which had once more grown abnormally attentive, the sound of the water had ceased. My flesh began to creep a little, though I told myself the fading of the sound was entirely due to my position, that the walls of the stairway intercepted it. At the same time I felt that eye watching me, and a chilly sweat broke out upon my limbs, but I execrated my folly and refused to turn my head. Meanwhile, so alert had become my hearing that the escape of some gases, bubbling up from the bottom of the pool far out in the marsh, resounded as if close beside me. I tried to force the bolt back, but in vain, and I had just come to the conclusion that a sharp wrench would break away bolt, socket, and all, when an uncontrollable instinct of fear turned me about to see what peril threatened. The head of the dog was facing directly toward me, and its eyes, now wide open, flamed upon me with strange and awful whiteness. I sprang up the steps and was at the beast's side in an instant, but I found the head, as before, resting upon the paws, the eyes half closed and dull, the water gushing down into the basin. As I bathed my shaking hands and clammy forehead, I laughed with deep irritation. I said then to myself that the ignorant could hardly be blamed for even the wildest superstitions, when a cool-headed and enlightened modern like myself was so wrought upon by the fictions of his brain. I philosophized for some time, however, before I got the better of my repugnance to that doorway. I humorously assured myself that, at the worst, this incomprehensible beast was securely anchored to his fountain, and that if anything terrible were at the other side of the door which I was going to open, it surely could not be capable of much, good or ill, after its century or so of imprisonment. Then I walked firmly straight to the doorway and down the 7 steps, and I knew that first one eye was turned upon me, then both. The water was silent before I had gone 10 paces. It was useless trying to conquer the creeping of my skin, the fear that pricked along my nerves. So, bidding my reason ignore these minor discomforts, I busied myself with the problem of loosening the bolt socket. It occurred to me at the time that there might be an easier entrance at the other side of the wall, as nothing in this neighbourhood was in good enough repair to boast of more than 3 walls standing, but no, that would have been a concession to my illusions. I chipped away at the soft stone with my knife. I jerked hard upon the bolt, which gave a little with clatter of falling stucco, and on the instant I faced around like lightning, in an indescribable horror. There, at the very top of the steps, crouched the dog, its head thrust down close to my face. The stone jaws were grinning apart. A most appalling menace was in the wide, white eyes. I know I tugged once more upon the bolt, for a great piece of the door and arch crumbled and came away, and I thought, as the head closed down, that I made a wild spring to get past the crouching form. Then reason and consciousness forsook me. When sense returned, I found myself lying on a pile of rags in a darkish, garlicky hut, with the morning sunlight streaming in through the open door. I sat up, with the memory of my horror vivid upon me, and wondered, with a sigh of relief at the change, what sort of a place I had got to. I was in a very different quarter of the city from the neighbourhood of the fountain. Here were still the ruined outskirts, still the desolate marshes, but the highlands back in the city on the north began to rise just beyond the hut's door. I got up, but found my right shoulder almost disabled. I could not lift my arm without great pain. Yet my clothing was not torn, and bore no marks save of dust and travel. I was about to uncover and examine the damaged shoulder, when in came the owner of the hut, an honest-looking, heavy-set muleteer, who showed all his teeth in his gratification at observing my recovery. As I gathered from my host, he had had occasion to pass what he called the Fonte de Carno, near sunset of the afternoon preceding. He had found me lying in a stupor, face down, across the basin of the fount, and directly beneath the jaws of the dog, which he piously crossed himself on mentioning, not stopping to look for explanations. Though he saw the old door was partly broken away, he had put me on his mule and made haste homeward, in fear of the coming of twilight in that grim place. There had come up a great storm in the night, and then an earthquake, shaking down many old walls that had long been toppling to their fall. After sunrise, being a bold fellow, he had gone again to the place, in hope of finding some treasure revealed by the disturbance. Reports said there was treasure of some kind within the wall, but none had dared to look for it since the day, years before his birth, when two men undertaking the search had gone mad, with the great white eyes of the dog turned terribly upon them. There were other strange things said about the spot, he acknowledged reluctantly, which, however, he would not talk of even in daylight, and for himself, in truth, he knew but little of them. Now he continued, in place of anything having been laid bare, the whole top of the wall had fallen down, and buried steps and doorway in masses of ruin, but the fountain and the dog were untouched, and he had not cared to go nearer than was necessary. Having reached my lodgings, I rewarded the honest fellow, and sent him away in high feather, all forgetful of the treasure which the earthquake had failed to unearth for him. Once alone in my room, I made haste to examine my shoulder. I found it green and livid. I found also, with a sick feeling which I shall not soon forget, that it was bruised on either side with deep prints of massive teeth. End of The Stone Dog by Charles G.D. Roberts.
The Testament of a Man Forbid by John Davidson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Testament of a Man Forbid. Mankind has cast me out when I became so close a comrade of the day and night ignorant of earth and of the seasons of the year, and so submissive in my love of life and study of the world that I unknew the past and names renown, religion, art, inventions, thoughts, and deeds, as men unknow what good and evil fate befell their souls, before their bodies give them residence. How old the letter haunts the spirit still, as if the soul were other than the sum the body's powers make up, a golden coin amount of so much silver, so much bronze. I said, rejoicing, now I stand erect, and am that which I am. Compassionate, I watched a motley crowd beside me, bent beneath unsteady burdens, toppling loads of volumes, news and lore antique that showered about their ears to be re-edified on aching heads and shoulders overtasked. Yet, were these hodmen cheerful, ignorant of woe, whose character it is to seem predestined about the honorable care? They read their books, reread and read again. They balanced libraries upon their poles, and tottered through the valley almost prone, but certain they were nobler than the beasts. I saw besides in fields and cities hordes of haggard people, soaked in filth and slime, wherewith they fed the jaded earth, the while their souls of ordure stank. Automata that served machines, whose tyrannous revolt enthralled their lords, as if the mistletoe displaying a mournful gold and wintry pearls on sufferance should enchant the forest oak. Aware how multitudes of those enslaved no respite sought, but squandered leisure hours among the crowd whose choice or task it was to balance libraries upon their poles, I laughed a long, low laugh with weeping strung, a rosary of tears, to see mankind so dauntless and so dull, and cried at last, good people, honest people, cast them off and stand erect, for few are helped by books. What? Will you die crushed under libraries? Lo, 30 centuries of literature have curved your spines and overborne your brains. Off with it, all of it. Stand up. Behold the earth, life, death, and day and night. Think not the things that have been said of these, but watch them and be excellent, for men are what they contemplate. They mock me, yeah, the fox who lost his tail. Though you are crazed, we have our wits about us. Nay, I cried, there was besides an ape who lost his tail that he might change to man, undo the past. The rainbow reaches Asgard now, no more. Olympus stands untenanted. The dead have their serene abode in earth itself, our womb, our nature, and our sepulchre. Expel the sweet imaginings, profound humanities, and golden legends, forms heroic beauties, tripping shades, embalmed through hallowed ages in the fragrant hearts and generous blood of men. The climbing thoughts whose roots ethereal grope among the stars, whose passion flowers perfume eternity, weed out and tear, scatter and tread them down, dismantle and dilapidate high heaven. It has been said, ye must be born again. I say to you, men must be that they are. Philosophy, the juggling dupe who finds astounding meanings in the universe commodiously secreted by himself. Religion, that appoints the soul a flight imperial, hoods its vision then and plucks its plumes. Its arcing pinions tethers down to flap about a lay-stall. Art sublime, the ancient harlot of the ages, she whose wig of golden tinct enameled face and cushioned bosom rivet glowing looks, whose scented flatulence diviner seems than dulcet breath of girls who keep their tryst in hawthorn breaks devoutly, when the sap bestirs the troubled forest and the winds solace the moonlight earth with whispered news. Religion, art, philosophy, this God, this beauty, this idea men have filled the world with, study still and still adore, are only segments of the spirit's tale we must outgrow if spirit would ascend. Let spirit be the word for body and soul. Will language ne'er be fused and forged anew, and quit the withering life of fear and shame, of agony and pitiful desire, to reign untailed in heaven hereafter? Laugh! The changing image seizes you, or thus this beauty, this divinity, this thought, this hallowed bower and harvest of delight, whose roots ethereal seem to clutch the stars, whose amaranths
perfume eternity is fixed in earthly soil enriched with bones of used-up workers fattened with the blood of prostitutes, the prime manure and dressed with brains of madmen and the broken hearts of children. Understand it, you at least who toil all day and writhe and groan all night with roots of luxury, a cancer struck in every muscle. Out of you it is cathedrals rise and heaven blossoms fair. You are the hidden, putrefying source of beauty and delight, of leisured hours, of passionate loves and high imaginings. You are the dung that keeps the roses sweet. I say uproot it, plow the land, and let a summer fallow sweeten all the world. With mud, bespattered, bruised, with staves and stoned, you call us dung, me from the midst they drove. Alone I went in darkness, and in light, color, and sound attending on my steps, and life and death the ministers of men, my constant company. But in my heart of hearts I longed for human neighborhood, and bent my pride to win men back again. I came a penitent, and on my knees I climbed their stairs. I thundered at their doors and cried, I am your brother. In your wrath, as brethren should, destroy me. At your hands I must have life or death. I cannot bear the outcast's fate. They bade me then proclaim how seemed the world now in my penitence. But when I rose to speak, their palaces, their brothels, slums, cathedrals, theaters, asylums, factories, exchanges, banks, the patched-up world of heirlooms, hand-me-downs, that worm and moth dispute, of make-believe, of shoddy pinchbeck sweepings of the street, of war disguised, of unconcealed chicane, of shriveled drudge and swollen parvenu, turned at my glance into that murky vale where patient hodmen on their rounded backs sustain the thought of 30 centuries, where multitudes of slaves renounced their rest to balance libraries upon their poles, or to that giant oaf for vision shifts the world about like winds that shape the clouds, whose spiritual tale, most awkward now, that breeches hide the rump, is cherished still with ursine piety, or to that bower of heaven's delight, whose barbed and cancerous roots are struck in earthly soil enriched with blood of men and women. As I saw, I said, how could I else, and bade them as before, arise, uproot the pleasance, plow the land, and let the world lie fallow. Only then can any seed of change have room to grow. They yelled upon me, and their missiles flew, but one arose to represent the world, and at his nod their clamor ceased. He said, there is no harbor here for such as you. You know not what you say, nor understand how you have hurt yourself. You cannot, fool, and answered as befits, contrive to make a monkey human by caudotomy, nor can humanity transcend itself by shearing off its spirit at the root. That of the tale is false analogy. Man springs from out the past. His taproots pierce the strata of the ages, drawing strength from every generation, every cult. The scission of the smallest rootlet harms his growth. Then, turning, he adjured the crowd, be warned, or be accursed. This monster steps beyond the scope and furthest bound of man. Mere mirror is his brain, his heart, mere husk. A waft of death comes from him. Would you live indifferent to your own delight, unmoved by kindred sorrow, and oblivious of all your fathers did, then give him ear, and quit forever the resourceful past? I know you will not. What, some pause to think? Resort now to the knife, and you will find 'tis not an unbecoming useless tale you sever manfully, to be yourselves but suicide of soul that you commit. To me, you ask for life or death from us because you cannot bear the outcast's fate. We disregard your claim. What you can bear is no concern of ours. We cast you out. Your well-earned portion of the universe is isolation and eternal death. Cut off, an alien, here you have no home. No face shall ever gladden at your step, no woman long to see you. Get you hence and seek the desert, or since your soul is dead, return your body to the earth at once, and let resolved oblivion triumph now. Gladly the world approved with hand and voice, and a woman offered me a knife. And let resolved oblivion triumph now, she echoed. Had it been my will to die, I should not then have made the sacrifice at the world's bidding, but I chose to live, for while I live, the victory is mine. So I went forth for evermore, forbid the company of men, the universe, systems, and suns, and all that breathes and is, appeared at first in that dread solitude. Only the momentary insolent eruption of a glittering fantasy into the silent, empty infinite. But eyes and ears were given to me again. With these a man may do, with these endure. I haunt the hills that overlook the sea. Here, in the winter, like a meshwork shroud, the sifted snow reveals the perished land and powders wisps of knotgrass dank and dead that trail like faded locks on moldering skulls unearthed from shallow burial. With the spring, the west wind thunders through the budding hedge that stems the furrowed steep, a sound of drums, of gongs, and muted cymbals. Yellow breasts and brown wings whirl in gusts, fly chafering, drop and surge in gusts again. In wooded combs, the hyacinth with purple diapers, the russet beech mast, and the cowslips hoard their virgin gold in lucent chalices. The sombre firs, all suddenly attired in rich brocade, the enterprise in chief and pageant of the season overrides the rolling land and grids the bosomed plain that strips her green robe to a saffron shore and steps into the surf where threads and scales and arabesques of blue and emerald wave begin to damascene the iron sea, while faint from upland fold the covert peal, the sheep bell, and the cuckoo's mellow chime. Then, when the sovereign light from which we came of earth enamored bends most questioning looks, I watch the land grow beautiful, a bride transfigured with desire of her great lord, betrothal music of the tireless larks, heaven high, heaven wide, possesses all the air, and wreathes the shining lattice of the light, with chaplets, purple clusters, vintages of sound from the first fragrant breath and first tear-sprinkled blush of summer, to the deep, transmuted fire, the smoldering golden moons, the wine-stained dusk of autumn harvest ripe, and I behold the period of time when memory shall devolve and knowledge lapse, wanting a subject, and the willing earth leap to the bosom of the sun to be pure flame once more in a new time begun. Here, as I pace the pallid, doleful hills and serpentine declivities that creep unhonored to the ocean's shifting verge, or where, with prouder curve and greener sward surmounting peacefully the restless tides, the cliff escarpment ends in storm-clad strength. End of Testament of a Man Forbid by John Davidson.
The Stillness by G. Ranger Wormser. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rebecca Granston. The Stillness by G. Ranger Wormser. He cringed in shuddering awe beneath the stillness. He could not stand the heavy deep silence of it, the muffled sucking thickness absorbing so completely all sound into its deadening mat. He had gotten so that he had to be perpetually stopping himself from screaming. He had to keep watch on himself always. He was terrified that he might go mad. He feared the oppression of the awful quiet would craftily draw his reason away from him. He did not want to scream. He did not want to attempt to defy the harrowing, rending silence. He was afraid of the blanketing, saturating weight of the stillness. Sometimes when he could bring himself to think, he thought that he might, after all, like to go about shouting at the top of his lungs. His mind kept on surreptitiously toying with the thought of the relief from the thing. He thought of it a lot. He knew that shouting about his own farm would not do him any good. He was too far away from everything, and everyone in the strip of valley hemmed in between the rolling hills. Of course there was Old Man Efforts. Old Man Efforts did not live so very far away. He knew he could not count on Efforts. Efforts had lived there too long in the stillness that rolled down to him from the hills and came together to lie flat and sluggish, thudding down on the valley land. If he could not bring himself to walk into the 10-mile-off town shouting so that other people would follow after him shouting, so that there would be some kind of continuous human noise for a while, it was that he wanted more than anything else. Human noise. At night he would wake suddenly from his heavy, quiet slumber, from the dreamless, ponderous pit of it, and listen to the stillness. When he first went to bed, it would take him hours before he could get himself to sleep. He dreaded the muted, frantic struggle of those dragging, pulling hours in which he would try to shut his ears to the soundless, deafening silence that throbbed noiselessly from a great distance and was noiseless in the room all about him, and pressed noiselessly against his blood-filled eardrums. He had the feeling at night that the stillness became more real, sweeping in a greater rush down the hills, that it had a heightened, insidious power to get inside of him. He would toss about on his narrow wooden bed for hours, moving cautiously and carefully so as not to do anything that would offend the drugged burden of the silence. He would move a leg or an arm slyly, and then he would lie quite quiet for a time, holding his breath until the cracking pain came plunging again and again into his chest. He could feel the stillness filling in all the spaces and crevices around him, so that he thought it rose and swelled hideously. He was afraid of those hours before he went to sleep, before he could drop off with that overwhelming sense that in losing consciousness he was consciously letting himself drown in a tremendous swollen wave of silence. And then toward morning, that sudden, inevitable awakening, his rousing himself to listen, his whole body becoming rigid, tautly holding itself with straining, shaking muscles to the position in which he lay, the sweat breaking out all over him and trickling coldly down from his armpits along his sides, his cunning shifting of his head, so that he could clear his ears to hear better, his futile hearkening for the sound that never came, his intensive shivering waiting for it, and nothing but the stillness. He could never make himself move. The thing was so actual, suffocatingly potent, malignant. He had grown terrified of attempting to disrupt it in any of those little ways at his command. He had begun to think that the noise he would make would not be a noise. He could not have stood the shock of making a noise that would be quite vacantly without sound. All day long, working in his fields, he used to wonder at it. In the sunlight, it was with him still and baited. It rose up to him from the ground at his feet, from the soil it had wormed itself into. It crushed down on him from the clear blue sweep of the sky. It spread unseen towards him, down the long uncertain slopes of the hills, coming on always from all sides and staying. It had become so that nothing was real to him, nothing but the stillness that drenched everything, stifling and choking. The old mare working her way in front of the plough along the narrowed, deepening furrows was a ghost creature to him. The greyness of her blurred ahead of him in the brightest stream of sunlight. Her foolish, stilly glidings played horribly on his raw nerves. At all times she was a phantom animal, stirring with the intangible motion of the silence. He felt that she did not belong to him, that she was a thing of the stillness. He would trail after her, his quivering thin hands on the plough handles, his eyes riveted on her bony withers. he would try to concentrate his thoughts on the way she moved, and then overcome quite suddenly with the quiet, insidious stealth of her ambling, he would pull her up and stop to mop his forehead, his eyes going slowly around him, as if he almost expected to see the thing that had lain that smothering, strangling hold onto him. His one and only companion was a yellow mongrel that had come slinking in at the farm gate, its tail drooping between its legs. He had been glad at first of having the dog with him, and then gradually he had come to feel the oddness of the animal. If he could have done so, he would have turned the dog out again into the stillness from which it had come to him. He was sure that the mongrel must be old, unnaturally old. He could not understand the dog's awful quiet. In his heart he was scared of the dog. The mongrel followed incessantly at his heels, always with dragging tail. Whenever his eyes turned behind him, they met the mongrel's eyes that were fixed on him, the eyes that were filled with that uncanny beaten look, as if it had been horridly cowed. There was an age of agony in the dog's eyes. As the days went on, he became more and more afraid of the mongrel's eyes. He had come out to the farm to start with because of the silence. He had felt that he would have to get away from the noise and the tumultuous uproar of the city. After what he had done, he could not stand it. He had gotten away. He thought now that his mind would snap, that it would break from under the lull which had come to it, the lull which devastated him with its hushed brutality. He had never been fond of people. Even in those days back there in the city before he had done the thing that was wrong, he had mistrusted them, and after it he had run from them, run wildly and unthinkingly to cover with the fear of them coming on behind him. The deathly, lonely farm was to him at that time a haven of rest. He had made up his mind to live on the farm until the end of his life. He used to think bitterly of his waiting so patiently for his death. When he could think of anything other than the silence, he thought of his dying, of life being squeezed out of him by the shrouded quiet. Sometimes he would wonder if it were death that ominously waited for him in that appalling, threatening stillness. There had been days when he had tried to recall the sounds of voices he had known. He had spent long hours in awakening in his memory those voices. He had wanted particularly to think of people laughing. He used to want to get the pitch of their laughing, to surround himself with the vibration of reiterated laughter. And then he had gotten it so that he almost heard it, so that he felt that with concentrated attention he might hear the laughing. He would find himself listening to the frightful, numbing stillness. He had not the courage to go on trying that. Following the plough and the old grey mare through the fields with the dog skulking abjectly at his heels, he would think of that thing which he had done that had ostracised him from the rest of humanity. He never thought of the possibility of making his life over again. He could not have thought of it if he had wanted to. It was all too hopeless, too impossible to think about. The deadening quiet in which he had been steeped had drained him, sapped from him all initiative. When evening came, he would go into his shack and close the door. He would light the oil lamp on the old table that stood at the centre of the room, and he would go about getting supper for himself and the mongrel. He took great care always to move his pots and pans gently. If he picked up a plate, he did it slowly, softly. When he put his bowl of food on the table, he slid it consciously onto the surface without noise, and going to and fro not oftener than he had to. His feet, in their padded moccasins, lifted him to his toes. He ate quietly and quickly, swallowing his food without chewing, feeding himself and the dog with his fingers, and all the while feeling that the stillness was rushing down from the hills and gathering to greater force about him. And when he was quite finished with the clearing away of his dishes, he would sit beside the table, the mongrel in front of him, and he would think frantically of the relief of talking. His lips would begin to quiver hideously, to move. That hoarse, inhuman muttering that had no sound of voice in it would start, and then he would see the dog's eyes, filled with that horrid beaten look, fixed on his mouth, and he would stop, gasping. Once every little while, Old Man Efforts would come down to the shack in the valley. He knew nothing of Old Man Efforts, other than that ever since he had come to live at the farm, Efforts had stopped in for an evening now and again. At first he had resented Old Man Efforts' coming. Later, when he had seen that Efforts would not interfere with him, he had not minded so much. He had become quite used to seeing the bent, huddled figure of the man, trailing down the hillside and shambling into the room to sit there opposite to him quite silent. Of late, he had gone about fetching the old man a glass of cider and a piece of bread, and they had sat facing each other, never talking, just sitting rigidly with the dog on the floor between them, and the silence spilling itself in gigantic floods all around them. And then old Efforts would light his pipe, and when he had finished it, he would get up and go out of the door. And after he had watched Old Man Efforts go, with the feeling that he might not be real, he would stumble up to his room to lie in the narrow wooden bed, trying to shut his ears to the deafening silence about him, cringing between his blankets as the swell of it heightened insidiously. He knew that the stillness had swamped itself into Old Man Efforts. He could see the stamp of it in the uncertain, stupefied face, in the bewildered eyes that had behind them something of the look that stayed on in the dog's eyes, in the thin-lipped mouth that drooled at the corners, in the old man's still, quiet way of moving, the unreal, phantom way in which the grey mare moved. He did not know why the old man should come to him to sit so dumbly opposite him for the whole evening. He did not care. He was long past caring. There were times when he thought he might tell Old Man Efforts of that thing which he had done years ago, and which had isolated him from his fellows. Not that he thought so much of it. He had almost forgotten it. The stillness had made him forget everything but itself, had pushed everything out of his mind before its own spreading weight. But he kept the thought of speaking to Efforts of what he had done in the back of his head. He knew how his telling it to Efforts could not fail to act. He knew that something would infallibly happen, that the surprise of it could not help but penetrate the thickness of Efforts' silence. He always felt, soothing himself with the thought of relief, that when the power of the stillness became unbearable, he would shock old Efforts into talk. There were moments when he hungered savagely to force old Efforts out of his walling quiet, moments when he was starving for the comfort of human sound, his voice and Efforts' voice, voices that would rise above the stillness, voices that would penetrate cunningly through the quiet, voices that would speak and answer each other. He was sitting in the centre of his lamplit room. He had had his supper and had cleared away the dishes with his usual crafty carefulness. He had lighted his pipe. He sat in the chair beside the table, his body quite rigid, his arms and legs stiffened to a torturing quiet. The mongrel crouched at his feet. There was something strange in the way the animal lay, in its tightened muscles that pulled and twitched as it breathed. Whenever he looked down, his eyes met the dog's eyes. Outside, the heavy shadows of the night crept along the ground, pushed on by the rushing, rising silence behind them. He knew that the stillness was rolling down the slope of those long hills. He knew that its awful quiet was gathering in the valley. He knew that it was trickling horridly still into the low-ceilinged room. He had the feeling for the 1000th time that the most minute noise was swallowed up in the stillness before it came into being. He looked up then to see the door shoved warily ajar. A wrinkled, ugly hand showed against the dark wood in a lighter patch of brown. A coarse booted foot came behind the swing of the door. Standing against the black of the night, he saw Old Man Efforts. He watched the old man come into the room. He saw him pull up a chair, lifting it from off the floor and setting it down opposite to him, within the pooling space of the yellow lamplight. He stared at Efforts as he sank into the chair. Old Man Efforts took out his pipe and lit it. He kept his eyes on Efforts, as he had so often done, on the uncertain, stupefied face that was turned to him, on the bewildered eyes that had something behind them of the look that stayed on in the dog's eyes, on the thin-lipped mouth that drooled at the corners. He got up then and went on his toes to the door and closed it softly. He felt that Efforts' eyes were on him, and the mongrel's eyes. He came back and sat down in his chair. They both smoked quietly. He remembered the glass of cider and the piece of bread. He could not bring himself to move tonight. He felt the suffocating weight of the stillness crowding past him. It was expanding menacingly throughout the small room. It filled in all about him. Presently, Old Man Efforts would finish his pipe and would get up and shamble out of the door. He would sit there and watch him go, as he always watched, wondering if perhaps Old Man Efforts was not real. And then he would stumble up to bed and lie awake and listen to the stillness that grew greater and greater. He wanted the relief from that silence, wanted it desperately, passionately. He remembered that if he told Efforts of that thing that he had come so near forgetting in the smothering quiet, that he would have what he so frantically wanted, some human speech, human talk that would break the silence even for a little while, the sound of human voices that would rise and answer each other. He glanced at the old man surreptitiously. He tried to think what expression would come into that stupid face with the bewildered eyes. He tried to see the thin-lipped, drooling mouth, as it would look with the lips of it startled into moving. He sat very still. Words formed themselves, lagging into his mind. I am going to tell. He would start to say it to Old Man Efforts that way. He would not stand the stillness any longer. Anything was better than the appalling agony of the quiet. He made a little tentative movement with his thin, shaking hands. He felt that Efforts was staring at him. The mongrel crouching at his feet moved stealthily. He heard no sound from the animals moving. He knew it had gotten to its feet. He saw it standing there, between where he sat and where Efforts sat. He felt his lips begin to quiver. I am going to. He got the words into his head again through the menacing, waiting stillness. He muttered something. Old Man Efforts leaned forwards, his hand behind his ear. In a sudden blinding flash of knowledge, he realized that Old Man Efforts was deaf. He felt his mouth twisting around his face. He tried then to shout. His eyes avoided the mongrel's eyes that he knew were filled with that uncanny beaten look and were fixed on his jerking, grimacing mouth. All about him, the ominous, malignant silence. He tried again and again to speak. He could not talk. Sweat stood out in great glistening beads on his forehead and dribbled blindingly into his wide distended eyes. His body shook with the stupendous effort he was making. His tongue was swollen. He could feel his throat tightening so that it hurt. He could not get his words into that hoarse, inhuman muttering that had no sound of voice in it. He kept on trying and trying to speak. He saw that Old Man Efforts had finished his pipe. He watched him get out of his chair and go shambling across the room and through the door. He sat there. His hands went up to his working mouth. He wanted to hide the hideous jerking of it. His eyes met the mongrel's eyes. The stillness grew, appalling. End of The Stillness by G. Ranger Wormser.
Cain by Francis S. Saltus. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Cain. I roamed the young, fair earth for happy hours, when the first dawns upon its grace ascended, seeking its virgin secrets unattended, hailing the newborn flowers. I was a tiller of the blooming ground, the proud possessor of broad meadows, vernal, and in the doing of my task diurnal my happiness was found. I loved my liberal land where cattle teemed, my sunny slopes, my fair and fecund valleys, and through the rustle of my leafy alleys I wandered and I dreamed. My soul was warmed with song, I worked elate, glad of my noble toil, and nothing fearing, my God, august, religiously revering, conscious that he was great. Nature was fresh as I in those days, and though my sire from Eden had been ejected, I knew his sin, and God's decree respected, and, knowing it, gave him praise. Life unto me was utter joy. The light and splendor of my vast Creator filled me. The magnitude of his omniscience thrilled me. He was my day, my night. Screened by his guarding hand, I lived secure, I, the first flesh, born at the world's beginning, for he had harmed me not for Adam's sinning, but pardoning left me pure. Abel, my brother, perfect and most blessed, the chosen of my soul, was ever near me. His fond fraternal merriment would cheer me when I was sore oppressed. And wealth was mine in plenty, and I had wives, blonde as swaying wheat, content and duteous, caressing sisters, children fair and beauteous, and all these made life glad. And when I left, fatigued, the furrowed sod, to seek my home and gain their joyous greeting, my happiness by all their own completing, I knelt and worshipped God. But their gentleness could not appease his thirst for servile prayer, and he did shun them, and on a day of wrath did cast upon them a scourge and a disease. I could not quell it as they lay there stark. But high above this scene of lamentation, I felt God reveled in my desolation, and all my soul grew dark. Doubt dawned, for he, the omnipotent, the strong, no longer lent the beauty of his blessing to those who loved him, and in foul transgressing I brooded on my wrong. My wrong, for he whom I had much besought, he who had in his holy image made me, had wrecked my many prayers and had betrayed me. The thought burned as I thought. Forth in the glades where I had slept and sighed, with harrowing hesitations when I wandered, in deep and soundless solitudes I pondered of his preposterous pride. I saw life blooming, insolent, and rare around me with a keener, subtler wonder. I saw life rule the earth above and under. I saw life everywhere. Nature alert, perpetually new, rose green before me by that Maker's choosing, and as I watched it in my sombre musing, a thought stupendous grew. O God, I cried, whom once I could adore, I then so humble, now a loyal hater, will mar thy work, most insolent Creator, now and forevermore. My brawny arms will proudly sweep away before thine eye each thing on earth now living, and to destroy thy work, I, unforgiving, prepare in wrath today. Thy majesty my soul cannot appall. The tender earth is young and unencumbered. All creatures having life are known and numbered, and I, Cain, know them all. These will I slay, my wives and servants dear, my laughing children, and my welcome brother, my venerated sire, my white-browed mother, all and without a tear. I will not heed the tempting of a sigh,
To no compassionate call will I be pliant. All shall die before thee. Then, defiant, before thee I shall die. Yea, thou shalt look upon a desert bare, and clamor in vain for praise and anthems loudly, while I alone will live to answer proudly, thou shalt have no more prayer. Then, with my angry insults to the sky, unflinchingly my presence will pursue thee, and when I choose to cease to speak unto thee, then only will I die. I paused and listened with hot, hurried breath, erect, accepting all, alone, firm-hearted, and hearing then no answering voice, departed, to give life unto death. So, for unnumbered days, in wrath I slew alike the harmless birds, the beasts ferocious, without a pang or pain, in calm atrocious, as I had sworn to do. The swarming rivers, winding to far seas, by offal foul and carrion I polluted, and by the mastery of my hate imbruted, I felled the blooming trees. Far to the winds I flung the unrooted seed, from out the soil I tore the young buds growing, I burnt the bounteous orchards overflowing, and I was glad indeed. In every path my sateless rages toiled, I moved attended by my desolation, and by the marvels of my desecration I gloried as I spoiled. No Mara then was mine, and in my pride, successful, unabashed, and most exulting, God at each step defiantly insulting, I unto Abel cried, The Lord hath told me in a dream his whim. Hearken therefore unto his will, O brother. Prepare a firstling from thy flock, none other, in sacrifice to him, while I with offerings gathered from my trees, most humble fruit of unpretending savor, will strive to gain his providential favor, and by my worship please. And pious Abel, trusting in my love, glad in such sacrifice to be partaker, did burn a lamb as offering to his Maker, with all the fat thereof. Even then, I say, in my contempt severe, grandly, fraternally, I would have pardoned and melted by my tears a spirit hardened, had I not known God near. God, who had seen the savory gift, and sweet God, who was eager for our genuflection. God, who delighted in our base subjection, our servitude complete. I felt that he, invisible, was nigh. His great mysterious essence hovered over me. I felt his moody majesty before me, and with a savage cry, powerful enough to awe his holy head, my hosts of hate against him fast assembling, cruel, sublime, magnificent, untrembling, I struck my brother dead. And as I staggered, with hot arms defiled, warm with the blood of him I loved, yet tearless, gazing upon the face of God, and fearless, I arrogantly smiled. Ah, puny master, I cried in my delight, behold this gory holocaust, and nameless. Why dost thou strike me not, as I stand shameless? Tell me, where is thy might? Thy threats are impotent, O fallen one, vain, ruthless God of chastisement and error. I scorn thee, as a worm that writhes in terror. Mark what my hand hath done. Of hideous work, Jehovah, most austere, this is alone the terrible beginning. All upon earth the innocent, the sinning, by me shall disappear. Thou art the slave of man, born to obey before the tempest of my wrath indignant, and now imperiously, O God malignant, I bid thee go thy way. No lips again will thy false name adore, thy power most irredeemably is broken. Bow down before me, for I, man, have spoken. There will be life no more. And as I spake the law of my desire, wind-like I sped in fierce exasperation, filled with red visions of extermination, to slay my sons and sire. But pains mysterious, and by me unknown, clung to my loins. I felt my pulses quicken, and by the laggard hand of God, I, stricken upon the ground, fell prone. Conscious of lofty projects overcast, I lay frenetic, crushed, inefficacious, feeling that my sublimest dream, audacious, had unto nothing passed. God bade me rise, and on my brow did place a hated mark, whereby all mortals know me, by which a child unto a child can show me an odium, a disgrace. Then to the land of Nod upon the plain, an outcast but impenitent, he sent me, there to know agony and to repent me in unintended pain. I went rebellious with my treasured hate, and sullen through the desert now I wander. But when upon my mighty dreams I ponder, I know that they were great. End of Cain by Francis S. Saltus.
Silence by Benjamin de Casseres. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by RebeccaG. Silence by Benjamin de Casseres. They who are won to silence have passed the gaudy gates of Vanity Fair, the gates that open outwards to the purple hills of dreams. They have famished mid plenty and roistered with sick heart, and the noises they brewed and the beautiful dreams they spilled on the dusty highways, and the soft lies their eyes have told are no more. For them the reign of the real has begun. In silence they hear, and their souls are the noiseless footfalls of the eternal. Caked in those whispering south winds, burnished by those eternal suns that warm without scorching, swaddled in those white wrappings, gulfed thus in the immurmurous, they are the supreme critics of life. Before the tribunals of taciturnity, the strident is rapt to order, and the gilded gabbler of the portico is sentenced to wear the motley and caper with fishwomen. With shout and laughter we garnish the days, but sorrow comes with finger lifted to her puckered lip, and we are silent, for if we cry aloud it is where no one can hear. Each action contains the germ of a destiny. Each action is a distinct individual in embryo. And if we had a finer spiritual organ, we should find in these great silences of the soul destinies and embryos and veiled fates in myriad procession. The best of us, as we are, immured in our limitations, deafened by bodily hearing and blinded by bodily eyesight, can hear them, sometimes, scratching their messages on the walls of our being as they pass by. I see a huge crowd pacing the boulevards at midnight. Fanfare, pell-mell, cackle, eyes that rove from point to point in anxious quest of pleasure. Fruitless pacings to and fro, inutile phrases whispered to gold-sodden, paunchy disciples of sociability by papier-mâché women, each soul in reality yawning at each other. I see also a narrow room on the top floor of a house, shrouded in silence. A youth holds Shelley's poems in his hand. Swiftly walk over the western wave, spirit of night. He has begun that exquisite invocation written by the boy of Spezzia Bay. With half-closed eyes he treads with Shelley the western wave, and is afloat in the spirit of night. And he has heard more than all the mottled mobs of the boulevard, for he listens, while the mobs can only hear. To be mewed in marmoreal silences, to fall with sated visage, and cloyed tongue, and a self, hewn to a million diversities, upon this downy bed canopied and curtained with gauzes and textures of strange patterns, to hear the uproar, tragic in its inutility, inutile in its tragedy, dwindle to a whirl buzz, then cease entirely, that is to feel the rapture of calm, the ecstasy of conscious surcease, a passionate peace. There are an awe, a wonder, a sheen to the ethereal in all fine silences. We here breathe upon the adamantine, and the adamantine is not. We give ourselves to float upon a far-winding stream, tinct with ancient sunlights, a bubble drifting upon a greater bubble, blown from pipes greater than pans. On these stilled waters we may be immersed without fear of drowning. It is immersion without submersion, reality without illusion, and we are hidden, yet seen of all. Hamlet's silences are the most impressive parts of the play. In his soliloquies we recognise the soul of the troubled Dane. The fates that lure him to the catastrophe evolve their deviltries in silence. The secret of the tragedy is spoken by no mouth. It is a presence unseen, unheard, but not unfelt by that inner nerve that responds to the idea in which the muddied action of the play is cradled. And with what subtle silent motions do the fates weave their filaments of adamant around the trusting Othello, damned by a fine virtue, undone by his own nature, discovered, rooted and bludgeoned to earth by an ingrained optimistic faith in the goodness of mankind. Iago is the fiend par excellence of dramatic literature. He is the quiet, grim architect of a most magnificent palace of pain. His sense of touch is exquisite. His building is a destroying. And yet in nothing that he says, in nothing that is heard, do we discover the depths of his extremest infamy. It is left to silence, to the imagination. It is Othello who goes out in utter spiritual darkness, and though Iago is gyved, he stands triumphant and silent. In that silence of Iago in the bedroom of Desdemona, the Eumenides have paused to survey their work. Iago was only their instrument. In those deep recesses of our being where the ashes of our dreams lie inurned in their bronzed, time-worn receptacles, in those caverns of the undersoul, where our projected but abrogated selves murmur against the decree that has sentenced them to those barren wombs, in all that past that is not, yet is everlastingly, we recognise something of the inarticulate, something that may not be uttered even by the heart to the brain. Ecstasy is mute. Shadows curl around I will, and acts are the undoing of dreams. I will not is bred of the higher view. If it is cold at the poles of ultimate negation, it is so only in spiritual prospect. When one has fought his way there, he has cast his laprobes of illusions behind. The sense of opposites is lost. There is neither cold nor heat on those silent promontories. There is placidity, the urgency to rest. The calm of a half-humorous disdain bathes us. The soul is then a rendezvous for shadows, the mind the Rialto of the dead. Postponements are postponed, and it is on the condition of perpetual silence that eternity has made her assignation with time. Thought laps us all about, and we are hemmed in by dreams. Speech and act, at best, are but a stammering. Our confessions to each other are a mere stutter. The finest revelations are made to ourselves. Who has never paid a pilgrimage unto himself, has never touched the Kabbalah. The Mecca of motion is oblivion. Elate youth darts upon life, and with rough hand and strident voice seizes his tinselled trophies. He takes the universe for his scutcheon, and by the divine right of vascular palpitation he claims the circling worlds. Blatant youth, where dost thou run, or rather, well runnest thou not? In mid-life his cries have withered to a whine, and our Don Quixote has dwindled to a vinegary critic. His elder age is a discreet silence. Old age should hold its tongue. Like the walls of old houses, it has secrets to tell. There is no soul born to flesh-woof that has not on a day heard the drumbeat of retreat sounded in its ears. We have fought and wept, replied and defied, but in the unconscious our genius is chiselling the hour, that faithful hour that shall put clamps upon our affirmations and sew up our lips with the golden threads of taciturnity. Our scale of life values has been wrong. The battles we have fought have only served to cloud our brains with the dust of combat. We see we have been trying to measure eternity by minutes. Thenceforth, we shall eternize minutes. We smile and take the veil. In silence there is universality. Lonely souls seek the solitudes of nature, because it is there the dreams of spiritual liberty come true. In these fastnesses are creatures disburdened of trammels. Winged and crawling things empty their souls of impulse as they list. In the wilderness, desire and attainment are one. The spirit soaked in these silences participates in the wild riot of life, riot without uproar, revels that are mum, endless muffled motion. The soul passes into all living things. The silent observer becomes the spirit of the place, and his meditations are spun into the crannies of shadows and the crevices of unapprehended worlds. Here man regains his lost kingdom and sits proudly throned on self. He feels himself at the very core of being, flush with every conceivable future. He's welded into a one. What has been is jettisoned, what is to come is unvisored. It is nirvana without annihilation. The squirrel that darts up the tree carries a human soul with it, and the bird that flies overhead is chanting a finer song than it knows, for it warbles for two. The forest dreamer rides on the crest of a fiery cloud, and the slime on the tarn, that is he, too. The individual is blotted out, and the mystery of the one in many, thenceforth it is no mystery. This is the only liberty man can ever attain, and the path lies through silence. Each must go his own way. There is a supreme release for each, but two cannot find it together. The unthwarted will, equilibration, quiescence, the suffusion of dateless days. Would these be yours? Then rivet yourself to the silences, put your ear to the dark shell of night, and fly the hubbub. Man is a phenomenal fragment, a temporal circumstance, a momentary coagulation of debris on the infinite stream of being. His personality is dispersed in death and meditation. In the vast upper silences the infantile eye of daily blab fades like the shadow of a dream. The whole universe of things lies stretched before us like islets in the ocean. The radiating streams of time flow back to their sources, and drag with them the bubble ages. Like a Greek naked and sweaty from the games, who plunges into a cooling stream, so we, sweaty and distraught, fresh from the satanic saturnalias of action, may plunge into the lustral calms, the healing silences, and forget. End of Silence by Benjamin de Casseres.
Mr. Whistler's 10 O'Clock by James Abbott McNeill Whistler. Delivered in London, February 20th, 1885, at Cambridge, March 24th, at Oxford, April 30th. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. An excerpt from The Gentle Art of Making Enemies, as pleasingly exemplified in many instances, wherein the serious ones of this earth, carefully exasperated, have been prettily spurred on to unseemliness and indiscretion, while overcome by undue sense of right. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great hesitation and much misgiving that I appear before you in the character of the preacher. If timidity be at all allied to the virtue modesty, and can find favor in your eyes, I pray you, for the sake of that virtue, accord me your utmost indulgence. I would plead for my want of habit, did it not seem preposterous, judging from precedent, that aught save the most efficient effrontery could be ever expected in connection with my subject. For I will not conceal from you that I mean to talk about art. Yes, art, that has of late become, as far as much discussion and writing can make it,
a sort of common topic for the tea table. Art is upon the town, to be chucked under the chin by the passing gallant, to be enticed within the gates of the householder, to be coaxed into company as a proof of culture and refinement. If familiarity can breed contempt, certainly art, or what is currently taken for it, has been brought to its lowest stage of intimacy. The people have been harassed with art in every guise, and vexed with many methods as to its endurance. They have been told how they shall love art and live with it. Their homes have been invaded, their walls covered with paper, their very dress taken to task, until, roused at last, bewildered and filled with the doubts and discomforts of senseless suggestion, they resent such intrusion and cast forth the false prophets, who have brought the very name of the beautiful into disrepute and derision upon themselves. Alas, ladies and gentlemen, art has been maligned. She has naught in common with such practices. She is a goddess of dainty thought, reticent of habit, abjuring all obtrusiveness, purposing in no way to better others. She is, withal, selfishly occupied with her own perfection only, having no desire to teach, seeking and finding the beautiful in all conditions and in all times, as did her high priest Rembrandt, when he saw picturesque grandeur and noble dignity in the Jews' quarter of Amsterdam, and lamented not that its inhabitants were not Greeks, as did Tintoret and Paul Veronese among the Venetians, while not halting to change the brocaded silks for the classic draperies of Athens, as did, at the court of Philip, Velasquez, whose infantas, clad in inesthetic hoops, are, as works of art, of the same quality of the Elgin marbles. No reformers were these great men, no improvers of the way of others. Their productions alone were their occupation, and, filled with the poetry of their science, they required not to alter their surroundings, for, as the laws of their art were revealed to them, they saw in the development of their work that real beauty which, to them, was much a matter of certainty and triumph, as is to the astronomer the verification of the result, foreseen with the light given to them alone. In all this, their world was completely severed from that of their fellow creatures, with whom sentiment is mistaken for poetry, and for whom there is no perfect work that shall not be explained by the benefit conferred upon themselves. Humanity takes the place of art, and God's creations are excused by their usefulness. Beauty is confounded with virtue, and before a work of art it is asked, what good shall it do? Hence it is that nobility of action in this life is hopelessly linked with the merit of the work that portrays it, and thus the people have acquired the habit of looking, as who should say, not at a picture but through it, at some human fact that shall or shall not, from a social point of view, better their mental or moral state. So we have come to hear of the painting that elevates, and of the duty of the painter that is full of thought, and of the panel that merely decorates. A favorite faith, dear to those who teach, is that certain periods were especially artistic, and that nations, readily named, were notably lovers of art. So we are told that the Greeks were, as a people, worshippers of the beautiful, and that in the 15th century art was ingrained in the multitude, that the great masters lived in common understanding with their patrons, that the early Italians were artists, all, and that the demand for the lovely thing produced it, that we of today, in gross contrast to this Arcadian purity, call for the ungainly, and obtain the ugly, that, could we but change our habits and climate, were we willing to wander in groves, could we be roasted out of broadcloth, were we to do without haste and journey without speed, we should again require the spoon of Queen Anne, and pick at our peas with the fork of 2 prongs, and so, for the flock, little hamlets grow near Hammersmith, and the steam horse is scorned. Useless, quite hopeless and false in the effort, built upon fable, and all because a wise man has uttered a vain thing and filled his belly with the east wind. Listen, there never was an artistic period. There never was an art-loving nation. In the beginning, man went forth each day, some to do battle, some to the chase, others again to dig to the delve and the field, all that they might gain and live, or lose and die, until there was found among them one, differing from the rest, whose pursuits attracted him not, and so he stayed by the tents with the women, and traced strange devices with a burnt stick upon the gourd. This man, who took no joy in the ways of his brethren, who cared not for conquest, and fretted in the field, this designer of quaint patterns, this deviser of the beautiful, who perceived in nature about him curious curvings, as faces are seen in the fire, this dreamer apart was the first artist. And when, from the field and from afar, there came back the people, they took the gourd, and drank from out of it. And presently there came to this man another, and in time others, of like nature chosen by the gods. And so they worked together, and soon they fashioned from the moistened earth forms resembling the gourd. And with the power of creation, the heirloom of the artist, presently they went beyond the slovenly suggestion of nature, and the first vase was born in beautiful proportion. And the toilers tilled, and were athirst, and the heroes returned from fresh victories to rejoice and to feast, and all drank alike from the artist's goblets, fashioned cunningly, taking no note the while of the craftsman's pride, and understanding not his glory in his work, drinking at the cup, not from choice, not from consciousness that it was beautiful, but because, forsooth, there was none other. And time, with more state, brought more capacity for luxury, and it became well that men should dwell in large houses, and rest upon couches, and eat at tables, whereupon the artist, with his artificers, built palaces, and filled them with furniture beautiful in proportion and lovely to look upon. And the people lived in marvels of art, and ate and drank out of masterpieces, for there was nothing else to eat and to drink out of, and no bad building to live in, no article of daily life, of luxury, or of necessity, that had not been handed down from the design of the master and made by his workmen. So Greece was in its splendor, and art reigned supreme by force of fact, not by election. And there was no meddling from the outsider. The mighty warrior would no more have ventured to offer a design for the temple of Pallas Athene than would the sacred poet have proffered a plan for constructing the catapult. And the amateur was unknown, and the dilettante undreamed of. And history wrote on, and conquest accompanied civilization, and art spread. Or rather its products were carried by the victors among the vanquished from one country to another, and the customs of cultivation covered the face of the earth, so that all people continued to use what the artist alone produced. And centuries passed in this using, and the world was flooded with all that was beautiful, until there rose a new class who discovered the cheap and foresaw fortune in the facture of the sham. Then sprang into existence the tawdry, the common, the gewgaw. The taste of the tradesman supplanted the science of the artist, and what was born of the million went back to them and charmed them, for it was after their own heart. And the great and the small, the statesman and the slave, took to themselves the abomination that was tendered, and preferred it, and have lived with it ever since. And the artist's occupation was gone, and the manufacturer and the huckster took his place. And now the heroes filled from the jugs and drank from the bowls with understanding, noting the glare of their new bravery and taking pride in its worth. And the people, this time, had much to say in the matter, and all were satisfied. And Birmingham and Manchester arose in their might, and art was relegated to the curiosity shop. Nature contains the elements in color and form of all pictures, as the keyboard contains the notes of all music. But the artist is born to pick and choose, and group with science these elements, that the result may be beautiful, as the musician gathers his notes and forms his chords until he bring forth from chaos glorious harmony. To say to the painter that nature is to be taken as she is to say to the player that he may sit on the piano. That nature is always right is an assertion artistically as untrue as it is one whose truth is universally taken for granted. Nature is very rarely right, to such an extent even that it might almost be said that nature is usually wrong. That is to say, the condition of things that shall bring about the perfection of harmony worthy a picture is rare, and not common at all. This would seem to even the most intelligent a doctrine almost blasphemous, so incorporated with our education has the supposed aphorism become, that its belief is held to be part of our moral being, and the words themselves have in our ear the ring of religion. Still, seldom does nature succeed in producing a picture. The sun blares, the wind blows from the east, the sky is bereft of cloud, and without all is of iron. The windows of the Crystal Palace are seen from all points of London. The holiday-maker rejoices in the glorious day, and the painter turns aside to shut his eyes. How little this is understood, and how dutifully the casual in nature is accepted as sublime, may be gathered from the unlimited admiration daily produced by a very foolish sunset. The dignity of the snow-capped mountain is lost in distinctness, but the joy of the tourist is to recognize the traveler on the top. The desire to see, for the sake of seeing, is, with the mass, alone the one to be gratified, hence the delight in detail. And when the evening mist clothes the riverside with poetry, as with a veil, and the poor buildings lose themselves in the dim sky, and the tall chimneys become campanili, and the warehouses are palaces in the night, and the whole city hangs in the heavens, and fairyland is before us, then the wayfarer hastens home. The working man and the cultured one, the wise man and the one of pleasure cease to understand, as they have ceased to see, and nature, who for once has sung in tune, sings her exquisite song to the artist alone, her son and her master, her son in that he loves her, her master in that he knows her. To him her secrets are unfolded. To him her lessons have become gradually clear. He looks at her flower, not with the enlarging lens that he may gather facts for the botanist, but with the light of the one who sees in her choice selection of brilliant tones and delicate tints suggestions of future harmonies. He does not confine himself to purposeless copying without thought each blade of grass as commended by the inconsequent, but, in the long curve of the narrow leaf corrected by the straight tall stem, he learns how grace is wedded to dignity, how strength enhances sweetness, that elegance shall be the result. In the citron wing of the pale butterfly, with its dainty spots of orange, he sees before him the stately halls of fair gold, with their slender saffron pillars, and is taught how the delicate drawing high upon the walls shall be traced in tender tones of opprement, and repeated by the bass in notes of graver hue. In all that is dainty and lovable he finds hints for his own combinations, and thus is nature ever his resource and always at his service, and to him is naught refused. Through his brain, as through the last alembic, is distilled the refined essence of the thought which began with the gods, and which they left him to carry out. Set apart by them to complete their works, he produces that wondrous thing called the masterpiece, which surpasses in perfection all that they have contrived in what is called nature. And the gods stand by and marvel and perceive how far away more beautiful is the Venus of Milos than was their own Eve. For some time past, the unattached writer has become the middleman in this matter of art, and his influence, while it has widened the gulf between the people and the painter, has brought about the most complete misunderstanding as to the aim of the picture. For him, a picture is more or less a hieroglyph or symbol of story. Apart from a few technical terms, for the display of which he finds an occasion, the work is considered absolutely from a literary point of view. Indeed, from what other can he consider it? And in his essays he deals with it as with a novel, a history, or an anecdote. He fails entirely and most naturally to see its excellencies or demerits, artistic, and so degrades art, by supposing it a method of bringing about a literary climax. It thus, in his hands, becomes merely a means of perpetuating something further, and its mission is made a secondary one, even as a means is second to an end. The thoughts, emphasized, noble or other, are inevitably attached to the incident, and become more or less noble according to the eloquence or mental quality of the writer, who looks the while with disdain upon what he holds as mere execution, a matter belonging, he believes, to the training of the schools, and the reward of assiduity. So that, as he goes on with his translation from canvas to paper, the work becomes his own. He finds poetry where he would feel it were he himself transcribing the event, invention in the intricacy of the mise-en-scene, and noble philosophy in some detail of philanthropy, courage, modesty, or virtue suggested to him by the occurrence. All this might be brought before him, and his imagination be appealed to by a very poor picture. Indeed, I might safely say that it generally is. Meanwhile, the painter's poetry is quite lost to him, the amazing invention that shall have put form and color into such perfect harmony that exquisiteness is the result, he is without understanding. The nobility of thought that shall have given the artist's dignity to the whole says to him absolutely nothing. So that his praises are published for virtues we shall blush to possess, while the great qualities that distinguish the one work from the thousand, that make of the masterpiece the thing of beauty that it is, have never been seen at all. That this is so, we can make sure of by looking back at old reviews upon past exhibitions and reading the flatteries lavished upon men who have since been forgotten altogether, but upon whose works the language has been exhausted in rhapsodies that left nothing for the national gallery. A curious matter, in its effect upon the judgment of these gentlemen, is the accepted vocabulary of poetic symbolism that helps them by habit in dealing with nature. A mountain to them is synonymous with height, a lake with depth, the ocean with vastness, the sun with glory. So that a picture with a mountain, a lake, and an ocean, however poor in paint, is inevitably lofty, vast, infinite, and glorious on paper. There are those also, sombre of mien, and wise with the wisdom of books, who frequent museums and burrow in crypts, collecting, comparing, compiling, classifying, contradicting, expert these, for whom a date is an accomplishment, a hallmark, success. Careful in scrutiny are they, and conscientious of judgment, establishing, with due weight, unimportant reputations, discovering the picture by the stain on the back, testing the torso by the leg that is missing, filling folios with doubts on the way of that limb, disputations and dictatorial concerning the birthplace of inferior persons, speculating in much writing upon the great worth of bad work. True clerks of the collection, they mix memoranda with ambition, and reducing art to statistics, they file the 15th century and pigeonhole the antique. Then the preacher, appointed, he stands in high places, harangues and holds forth, sage of the universities, learned in many matters, and of much experience in all, save his subject, exhorting, denouncing, directing, filled with wrath and earnestness, bringing powers of persuasion and polish of language to prove nothing, torn with much teaching, having naught to impart, impressive, important, shallow, defiant, distressed, desperate, crying out and cutting himself, while the gods hear not. Gentle priests of the Philistine withal. Again he ambles pleasantly from all point, and through many volumes, escaping scientific assertion, babbles of green fields. So art has become foolishly confounded with education, that all should be equally qualified. Whereas, while polish, refinement, culture, and breeding are in no way arguments for artistic result, it is also no reproach to the most finished scholar or greatest gentleman in the land that he be absolutely without eye for painting or ear for music, that in his heart he prefer the popular print to the scratch of Rembrandt's needle, or the songs of the hall to Beethoven's C minor symphony. Let him have but the wit to say so, and not feel the admission a proof of inferiority. Art happens. No hovel is safe from it. No prince may depend upon it. The vastest intelligence cannot bring it about, and puny efforts to make it universal end in quaint comedy and coarse farce. This is as it should be, and all attempts to make it otherwise are due to the eloquence of the ignorant, the zeal of the conceited. The boundary line is clear. Far from me to propose to bridge it over, that the pestered people be pushed across. No, I would save them from further fatigue. I would come to their relief, and would lift from their shoulders this incubus of art. Why, after centuries of freedom from it and indifference to it, should it now be thrust upon them by the blind, until wearied and puzzled they know no longer how they shall eat or drink, how they shall sit or stand, or wherewithal they shall clothe themselves, without afflicting art? But lo, there is much talk without. Triumphantly they cry, beware, this matter does indeed concern us. We also have our part in all true art. For, remember, the one touch of nature that makes the whole world kin. True, indeed, but let not the unwary jauntily suppose that Shakespeare herewith hands him his passport to paradise, and thus permits him speech among the chosen. Rather learn that in this very sentence he is condemned to remain without, to continue with the common. This one chord that vibrates with all, this one touch of nature that calls aloud to the response of each, that explains the popularity of the bull of Paul Potter, that excuses the price of Murillo's conception, this one unspoken sympathy that pervades humanity is vulgarity. Vulgarity, under whose fascinating influence the many have elbowed the few, and the gentle circle of art swarms with the intoxicated mob of mediocrity, whose leaders prate and counsel and call aloud, where the gods once spoke in whisper. And now from their midst the dilettante stalks abroad, the amateur is loosed, the voice of the aesthete is heard in the land, and catastrophe is upon us. The meddler beckons the vengeance of the gods, and ridicule threatens the fair daughters of the land. And there are curious converts to the weird cult in which all instinct for attractiveness, all freshness and sparkle, all woman's winsomeness, is to give way to a strange vocation for the unlovely, and this desecration in the name of the graces. Shall this gaunt, ill-at-ease, distressed, abashed mixture of movis haunte and desperate assertion call itself artistic and claim cousinship with the artist, who delights in the dainty, the sharp, bright gaiety of beauty? No, 1,000 times no. Here are no connections of ours. We will have nothing to do with them. Forced to seriousness, that emptiness may be hidden, they dare not smile, while the artist, in fullness of heart and head, is glad, and laughs aloud, and is happy in his strength, and is merry at the pompous pretension, the solemn silliness that surrounds him. For art and joy go together, with bold openness, and high head, and heavy hand, fearing not, and dreading no exposure. Know then, all beautiful women, that we are with you. Pay no heed, we pray you, to this outcry of the unbecoming, this last plea of the plain. It concerns you not. Your own instinct is near the truth. Your own wit far surer guide than the untaught ventures of thick-heeled Apollos. What? Will you up and follow the first piper that leads you down Petticoat Lane, there on a Sabbath to gather for the week from the dull rags of ages wherewith to bedeck yourselves, that, beneath your travestied awkwardness, we have trouble to find your own dainty selves? Oh, fie! Is the world then exhausted, and must we go back because the thumb of the mountebank jerks the other way? Costume is not dress, and the wearers of wardrobes may not be doctors of taste. For by what authority shall these be pretty masters? Look well, and nothing have they invented, nothing put together for comeliness' sake. Haphazard from their shoulders hang the garments of the hawker, combining in their person the motley of many manners with the medley of the mummer's closet, set up as a warning and a finger-post of danger. They point to the disastrous effect of art upon the middle classes? Why this lifting of the brow in deprecation of the present, this pathos in reference to the past? If art be rare today, it was seldom heretofore. It is false, this teaching of decay. The master stands in no relation to the moment at which he occurs, a monument of isolation, hinting at sadness, having no part in the progress of his fellow men. He is also no more the product of civilization than is the scientific truth asserted, dependent upon the wisdom of a period. The assertion itself requires the man to make it. The truth was from the beginning. So art is limited to the infinite, and beginning there cannot progress. A silent indication of its wayward independence from all extraneous advance is in the absolutely unchanged condition and form of implement since the beginning of things. The painter has but the same pencil, the sculptor the chisel of centuries. Colors are not more, since the heavy hangings of night were first drawn aside and the loveliness of light revealed. Neither chemist nor engineer can offer new elements of the masterpiece. False again the fabled link between the grandeur of art and the glories and virtues of the state. For art feeds not upon nations, and peoples may be wiped from the face of the earth, but art is. It is indeed high time that we cast aside the weary weight of responsibility and co-partnership, and know that in no way do our virtues minister to its worth, in no way do our vices impede its triumph. How irksome, how hopeless, how superhuman the self-imposed task of the nation, how sublimely vain the belief that it shall live nobly or art perish. Let us reassure ourselves that our own option is our virtue. Art we in no way affect, a whimsical goddess, and a capricious. Her strong sense of joy tolerates no dullness, and live we never so spotlessly, still may she turn her back upon us. As from time immemorial she has done upon the Swiss in their mountains, what more worthy people, whose every alpine gap yawns with tradition and is stocked with a noble story, yet the perverse and scornful one will none of it, and the sons of patriots are left with the clock that turns the mill, and the sudden cuckoo with difficulty restrained in its box. For this was Telehero, for this did Gessler die. Art, the cruel jade, cares not, and hardens her heart, and hies her off to the east to find among the opium-eaters of Nankin a favourite, with whom she lingers fondly, caressing his blue porcelain, and painting his coy maidens, and marking his plates with her 6 marks of choice, indifferent in her companionship with him to all save the virtue of his refinement. He it is who calls her, he who holds her, and again to the west, that her next lover may bring together the gallery at Madrid, and show to the world how the master towers above all, and in their intimacy they revel, he and she, in this knowledge, and he knows the happiness untasted by other mortal. She is proud of her comrade, and promises that in after years others shall pass that way and understand. So in all time does the superb one about for the man worthy her love, and art seeks the artist alone. Where he is, there she appears and remains with him, loving and fruitful, turning never aside in moments of hope deferred, of insult, and of ribald misunderstanding. And when he dies, she sadly takes her flight, though loitering yet in the land, from fond association, but refusing to be consoled. And so have we the ephemeral influence of the master's memory, the afterglow in which are warmed for a while the worker and disciple. With the man, then, and not with the multitude, are her intimacies, and in the book of her life the names inscribed are few, scant indeed, the list of those who have helped to write her story of love and beauty. From the sunny morning when, with her glorious Greek relenting, she yielded up a secret of repeated line, as, with his hand in hers, together they marked in marble the measured rhyme of lovely limb and draperies flowing in unison, to the day when she dipped the Spaniard's brush in light and air, and made his people live within their frame, and stand upon their legs, that all nobility and sweetness and tenderness and magnificence should be theirs by right. Ages had gone by, and few had been her choice. Countless, indeed, the horde of pretenders, but she knew them not. A teeming, seething, busy mass, whose virtue was industry, and whose industry was vice. Their names go to fill the catalogue of the collection at home, of the gallery abroad, for the delectation of the bagman and the critic. Therefore have we cause to be merry, and to cast away all care, resolved that all is well, as it ever was, that it is not meet that we should be cried at, and urged to take measures. Enough have we endured of dullness. Surely are we weary of weeping, and our tears have been cozened from us falsely, for they have called out woe when there was no grief, and alas, where all is fair. We have then but to wait until, with the mark of the gods upon him, there come among us again the chosen, who shall continue what has gone before, satisfied that, even were he never to appear, the story of the beautiful is already complete, hewn in the marbles of the Parthenon, embroidered with the birds upon the fan of Hokusai, at the foot of Fusiyama. End of Mr. Whistler's 10 o'clock lecture by James Abbott McNeill Whistler.
The Tocsin by Leonid Andreyev. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by RebeccaG. The Tocsin by Leonid Andreyev. 1. During that hot and ill-omened summer, everything was burning. Whole towns, villages and hamlets were consumed. Forests and fields were no longer a protection to them, and even the forests themselves submissively burst into flame, and the fire spread like a red tablecloth over the parched meadows. During the day the dim red sun was hidden in acrid smoke, but at night time, in all quarters of the sky, a quiet red glow burst forth, which rocked in silent fantastic dance, and strange confused shadows of men and trees crept over the ground, like some unknown species of reptile. The dogs ceased their welcoming bark, which from afar calls to the traveller and promises him a roof and hospitality, and either uttered a prolonged melancholy howl or crept into the cellar in sullen silence. And men, like dogs, looked at one another with evil frightened eyes, and spoke aloud of arson and secret incendiaries. Indeed, in one remote village they had killed an old man, who could not give a satisfactory account of his movements, and then the women had wept over the murdered man, and pitied his grey beard all matted with dark blood. During this hot and ill-omened summer, I lived at the house of a country squire, where were many women, young and old. By day we worked and talked, and thought little of conflagrations, but when night came on, we were seized with fear. The owner of the property was often absent in the town. Then for whole nights we slept not a wink, but in fear and trembling made our rounds of the homestead in search of an incendiary. We huddled close together and spoke in whispers, but the night was still, and the buildings stood out in dark, unfamiliar masses. They seemed to us as strange, as if we had never seen them before, and terribly unstable, as though they were expecting the fire and were already ripe for it. Once through a crack in the wall there gleamed before us something bright. It was the sky, but we thought it was a fire, and with screams the womenkind rushed to me, who was still almost a boy, and entreated my protection. But I held my breath for fear, and could not move a step. Sometimes in the depths of the night I would rise from my hot tumbled bed and creep through the window into the garden. It was an ancient, formal and stately garden, so protected that it answered the very fiercest storm with nothing more than a suppressed drone. Below it was dark and deadly still as at the bottom of an abyss, but above there was a continual indistinct rustling and sound, like the far-off speech of the steppe. Concealing myself from someone who seemed to be following at my heels and looking over my shoulder, I would make my way to the end of the garden, where upon a high bank stood a wattle fence, and beyond the fence, far below, extended fields and forests and hamlets hidden in the darkness. Lofty, gloomy, silent lime trees opened out before me, and between their thick black stems, through the interstices of the fence, and through the space between the leaves, I could see something terrible, extraordinary, which would fill my heart with an uneasy dread feeling and make my legs twitch with a slight tremor. I could see the sky, not the dark, still sky of night, but rosy red, such as is neither by day nor night. The mighty limes stood grave and silent, like men expecting something, but the sky was unnaturally rosy, and the ominous reflection of the burning earth beneath darted in fiery red spasms about the sky. And curling columns would go slowly up and disappear in the height, and it was a puzzle, as strangely unnatural as the pink colouring of the sky, how they could be so silent when below all was gnashing of teeth, how they could be so unhurried and stately there above when everything was tossing in restless confusion here below. As though coming to themselves, the lofty limes would all at once begin to talk together with their tops, and then suddenly relapse into silence, congealed, as it were, for a long time in sullen expectation. It would become still as at the bottom of an abyss, while far behind me I felt conscious of the house on the alert, full of frightened people. The limes crowded watchfully around me, and in front silently rocked a rose-red sky, such as is not nor by night nor day. And because I saw it not as a whole, but only through the interstices between the trees, it was all the more terrible and incomprehensible. 2. It was night, and I was dozing restlessly, when there reached my ear a dull staccato sound, rising as it seemed from below the ground. It penetrated my brain, and settled there like a round stone. After it another forced its way in, equally short and dolorous, and my head became heavy and sick, as though molten lead were falling upon it in thick drops. The drops kept boring and burning into my brain. They became ever more and more, and soon they were filling my head with a dripping rain of impetuous staccato sounds. Boom, 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 someone tall, strong and impatient kept jerking out from afar. I opened my eyes and at once understood that it was the alarm bell, and that Slobodici, the next village, was on fire. It was dark in the room, and the window was closed, and yet at the terrible call the whole room, with its furniture, pictures and flowers, went out, as it were, into the street, and no longer was one conscious of wall or ceiling. I do not remember how I got dressed. I know not why I ran alone, and not with the others, whether it was that they forgot me, or I did not remember their existence. The tocsin called persistently and dully, as though its sound were falling, not from the transparent air, but were cast forth from the immeasurable thickness of the earth. I ran on. Amid the rosy sheen of the sky the stars twinkled above my head, and in the garden it was strangely light, such as is neither by day nor by majestic moonlit night. But when I reached the hedge, something bright red, seething, tossing desperately, looked up at me through the fissures. The lofty limes, as though sprinkled with blood, trembled in their rounded leaves, and turned them back in fear, but their sound was inaudible on account of the short, loud strokes of the swinging bell. Now the sounds became clear and distinct, and flew with mad speed like a swarm of red-hot stones. They did not circle in the air like the doves of the peaceful Angelus, neither did they expand in the caressing waves of the solemn call to prayer. They flew straight like grim harbingers of woe, who have no time to glance backward and whose eyes are wide with terror. Boom, 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 they flew with unrestrainable impetuosity, the strong overtaking the weak, and all of them together delving into the earth and piercing the sky. And as straight as they, I ran over the immense tilled plain, which faintly scintillated with blood-red gleams, like the scales of a great black wild beast. Above my head, at a wonderful height, bright isolated sparks floated by, and in front was one of those terrible village conflagrations, in which, in one holocaust, perish houses, cattle, and human beings. There behind the irregular line of dark trees, now round, now sharp as pikes, the dazzling flame soared aloft, arched its neck proudly, like a maddened horse, leaped through burning flocks from its midst into the black sky, and then greedily stooped for fresh prey. The blood surged in my ears with the swiftness of my running, and my heart beat loud and rapidly. But the irregular strokes of the Tocsin overtook my heartbeats and struck me full on head and breast. And so full of despair was it that it seemed not the clanging of a metal bell, but as though the very heart of the much-suffering earth were beating wildly in the agony of death. Boom, 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 the red-hot conflagration ejaculated, and it was difficult to realize that the church belfry, so small and slight, so peaceful and still, like a maiden in a pink dress, could be giving forth those loud, despairing cries. I kept falling down on my hands against clods of dry earth, which scattered beneath them, and again I would rise and run on, and the fire and the summoning sound of the bell ran to meet me. One could already hear the wood crackling as it caught fire, and the many-voiced cry of human beings with the dominating notes of despair and terror. And when the serpent-like hissing of the fire ceased for a moment, a prolonged groaning became clearly differentiated. It was the wailing of women and the bellowing of cattle in a panic of terror. A swamp intercepted my path, a wide, weed-grown swamp which ran far to right and left. I went into the water up to my knees, then to the breast, but the swamp began to suck me down, and I returned to the bank. Opposite, quite close, raged the fire, throwing up into the sky golden sparks like the burning leaves of a gigantic tree, while the water of the swamp stood out like a mirror sparkling with fire in a black frame of reed and sedge. The Tocsin called, despairingly in deadly agony, "Come, do come." 3. I flung along the strand, and my dark shadow flung after me, and when I stooped down to the water to find a bottom, the spectre of a fire-red form gazed at me from the black abyss, and in the distorted lineaments of its face, and in its dishevelled hair, which seemed as though it were lifted up upon the head by some terrific force, I failed to recognize myself. Ah, what is it, O Lord? I prayed with outstretched hands. But the Tocsin kept calling. The bell no longer entreated. It shouted like a human being and groaned and choked. The strokes that had lost their regularity and piled themselves one on top of the other, rapidly and without echo. They died down, were reproduced, and again died down. Once more I bent down to the water, and alongside of my own reflection I perceived another fiery spectre, tall and erect, and to my horror just like a human being. "What's that?" I screamed, looking around. Close to my shoulder stood a man looking at the conflagration in silence. His face was pale, his cheeks were covered with still moist blood, which gleamed as it reflected the fire. He was dressed simply like a peasant. Possibly he had been already here when I ran up, and had been stopped like myself by the swamp, or possibly he may have arrived after me, but at all events I had not heard his approach, nor did I know who he was. "It burns," said he, without removing his eyes from the fire. The reflected fire leapt in them, and they seemed large and glassy. "Who are you? Where do you come from?" I asked. "You are all bloody." With long, thin fingers he touched my cheeks, looked at them, and again fixed his gaze upon the fire. "It burns," he repeated, without paying any attention to me. "Everything is burning." "Do you know how to get there?" I asked, drawing back. I guessed that this was one of the many maniacs which this ill-omened summer had produced. "It burns," he replied. "Ho, ho, don't it burn?" he cried, laughing, and looked at me kindly, wagging his head. The hurried strokes of the Tocsin suddenly stopped, and the flame crackled louder. It moved like a living thing, and with long arms, as though weary, dragged itself to the silent belfry, which now seemed near and tall, and clothed no longer in pink, but in red. Above the dark loophole, where the bells were hung, there appeared a timid, quiet tongue of fire, like the flame of a candle, and was reflected in pale rays on their metal surface. Once more the bell began to tremble, sending forth its last madly despairing cries, and once more I flung myself along the shore, and my black shadow flung after me. I'm coming, I cried, as though in reply to someone calling me. But the tall man was quietly seated behind me, embracing his knees, and kept singing in loud secondo to the bell. Boom, boom, boom. "Are you mad?" I shouted to him. But he only sang the louder and the merrier. Boom, boom, boom. "Be quiet," I entreated. But he smiled and sang on, wagging his head, and the fire flared up in his glassy eyes. He was more terrible than the fire, this maniac, and I turned round and took to flight along the shore. But I had scarcely gone a few steps when his lanky figure appeared silently alongside of me, his shirt fluttering in the wind. He ran in silence, even as I did, with long untiring strides, and in silence our black shadows ran along the upturned field. The bell was suffocating in its last death struggle, and cried out like a human being who, despairing of assistance, has lost all hope. And we ran on in silence aimlessly into the darkness, and close to us our black shadows leapt mockingly. End of The Tocsin by Leonid Andreyev.
Maldoror by Comte de Lautréamont. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Maldoror by Comte de Lautréamont. Translated by John Rodker in Broom, an International Magazine of the Arts, Volume 3, Number 1, August 1922. The Lay of Maldoror, First Canto. May it please heaven that the reader, emboldened and become temporarily ferocious, like what he is reading, will find his sudden and savage way across the lonely marshes of these somber and poison-filled pages without losing himself. For unless he bring to his reading a rigorous logic and tension of spirit equal at least to his suspicion, the mortal emanation of this book will soak his soul as water does sugar. It is not a good thing for all the world to read the pages which are about to follow. A few only will, without danger, taste this bitter fruit. Therefore, timid soul, before penetrating further into such unexplored territory, direct your heels backwards and not forwards. Listen well to what I say to you. Direct your heels backwards and not forwards. Like the eyes of a son who respectfully turns away from the august admiration of the maternal visage, or rather, like a wedge of deeply thoughtful and chilly cranes who under full sail fly powerfully through the winter across the silence, toward a certain point on the horizon whence comes suddenly a violent and strange wind, forerunner of the storm.
The oldest crane, itself the vanguard, noting this, waves its head like a reasonable person. Consequently, its beak also is made to clap, and is not pleased. I, too, would not be happy were I in its place. While its aged neck, featherless and contemporary with 3 generations of cranes, moves in irritable undulations as presage of the storm which approaches nearer and nearer. After having looked several times coolly about her in all directions, with eyes full of experience, the leader prudently, for she it is who has the distinction of showing her tail feathers to the other cranes, her intellectual inferiors, with her watchful cry, as of a mournful sentinel, to repulse the common enemy, gracefully turns the point of the geometric figure, and may be a triangle, but the third side, which these curious birds of passage form, like an experienced captain, whether to port or to starboard, is not seen, and maneuvering with wings hardly larger than a sparrow's, since she is no fool, takes another and surer philosophical path. By moonlight, near the sea, in remote parts of the countryside, plunged in bitter meditations, one sees everything take on yellow, doubtful, and fantastic shapes. Now quickly, now slowly, the trees' shadows run, approach and approach again in every shape, flattening themselves, pressing closely to earth. In the past, when I was carried away upon the wings of youth, that made me dream, seemed strange to me. Now I'm used to it. The wind moans through the leaves with languorous notes, and the owl recites its solemn lament, making the hair of those who hear it stand on end. Then the dogs, made savage, break their chains, escape from distant farms, fly through the countryside in all directions, a prey to madness. Suddenly they stop, examine all round them with ferocious disquiet, eyes blazing, and like the elephants which throw round them in the desert one last look at the sky, despairingly raising their trunks before dying, their ears hanging inert, so the dogs leave their ears inert, lifting their heads, puffing out their dreadful necks, and in turn, like a baby crying with hunger, or like a cat on a roof wounded in the belly, or like a woman about to bring forth, or like a plague-stricken moribund in hospital, or like a young girl singing a noble air, begin to bathe the northern stars, the eastern stars, the southern stars, the western stars, the moons, the mountains resembling giant rocks reclining in darkness, the icy air they inhale deeply from a distance, and which makes the insides of their scarlet nostrils burn, the nocturnal silence, the screech owl carrying off a rat or a frog in its beak, living food, tender for the living ones, in oblique flight, brushing their muzzles, the hares disappearing in the twinkling of an eye, the thief who after his crime flies fast as hoofs will carry him, snakes disturbing the heather, which makes their skin quiver and gnash their teeth, their own baying, which frightens them, the toads they crush with one snap of the jaw. Why did they leave the marsh? The trees whose gently waving leaves are so many incomprehensible mysteries to them, which they wish to solve with their staring intelligent eyes, the spiders hanging among their long legs, who clamber up trees to save themselves, the crows who could not find anything to eat during the day and who return to the nest with tired wings, the rocks of the shore, the fires which appear at the masts of individual vessels, the hollow noise of the waves, the great fish which, swimming, show their black backs, then disappear into the abysm, the man who enslaves them, after which they again rush through the countryside, leaping with bloody paws across ditches, roads, fields, passes, and craggy stones. One would think them mad, seeking some waste lake to quench their thirst. Their prolonged baying terrifies nature. Woe to the belated traveler! The cemetery's friends will cast themselves upon him, will tear him, will eat him with blood-dripping fangs, for their teeth are not decayed. The wild beasts, not daring to approach and take part in the meal of flesh, fly trembling out of sight. After some hours, the dogs, harassed by running in all directions and half-dead, tongues hanging from their mouths without knowing what they are doing, fall with an incredible swiftness, one upon the other, tearing each other into 1,000 pieces. they do not behave thus out of cruelty. Once my mother said to me with glassy eyes, "When from your bed you hear the baying of dogs in the countryside, hide under the blankets, nor mock their behavior. They have an unquenchable thirst for the infinite, like you, like me, like the rest of humanity, with long and pallid features. I even permit you to stand in front of the window to observe the spectacle sublime enough. Since then I have observed the dead one's wishes. Like the dogs, I too feel the need of the infinite. I cannot satisfy this need. According to what I have been told, I am the son of man and of woman. That astonishes me. For the rest, what does it matter whence I come? I thought more of myself. For myself, if I had depended on my own will, I would rather have wished to be the son of the female shark, whose hunger is the friend of tempests, and of the tiger of well-known cruelty. I will not be so malignant. You who look at me, go to a distance, for I exhale a poisonous breath. No one has yet seen the green wrinkles of my forehead, nor the projecting bones of my emaciated face, like the backbone of some great fish, or the rocks covering the seashore, or the abrupt alpine mountains which I often traveled over, when I wore hair of different color on my head. And when, during stormy nights, I prowl round the habitations of mankind, eyes burning, hair whipped by the storm wind, solitary as a stone in the middle of the road, I cover my withered face with a scrap of velvet, black as the soot which fills the insides of chimneys. It would not do for eyes to witness the ugliness that the Supreme Being, with a smile of mighty hate, has put upon me. Every morning when the sun rises, for others, scattering joy in salutary heat to all nature, while no one of my features moves, gazing fixedly into the space filled with shadow, crouching in the depths of my beloved cave. In a despair which intoxicates me like wine, I tear my chest in shreds with powerful hands. Yet I feel that I have not got hydrophobia. Yet I feel that it is not only I who suffer. Yet I feel that I breathe. Like a condemned man who tries his muscles, meditating upon their fate, and who will soon mount the scaffold, upright upon my pallet, eyes closed. I turn my neck slowly from right to left to right, during whole hours. I do not fall stark dead. From moment to moment, when my neck can no longer continue to turn in the same inertia and stops in order to begin to turn the opposite way, I see suddenly the horizon. Through the thick brushwood which cloaks the Morth, I do not see anything, nothing, but for the countryside which dances in whirlwinds with the trees and with the long files of birds which traverse the sky. That upsets my blood and brain. Who is it then, who hits me on the head with a bar of iron like a hammer striking an anvil? I propose to declaim full-throatedly and unemotionally the cold and grave strophe you will hear. Be then attentive to its content, and protect yourself against the painful impression which it cannot fail to leave like a blemish on your troubled thoughts. Do not imagine me to be at death's door, for I am not yet a skeleton, and age does not cling to my forehead. Put aside, therefore, any idea of comparison with the swan in that moment, when his existence takes flight, but see before you some monster whose face I am glad you cannot see, but that is less horrible than its soul. All the same, I am no criminal. Enough on this point. No great while has elapsed since I saw again the sea and walked the bridges of ships, and my souvenirs are as lively as though it were but yesterday I left them. Be then, if you are able, at least as calm as myself in pursuing this which I already repent of offering you, and do not blush at the thought of what the human heart is. Octopus, with a silky gaze, you whose soul is inseparable from my own, you the most beautiful of the terrestrial globe, lord of a harem of 400 suckers, you in whom the tender communicative virtue and divine grace sit nobly as though at home, mutually agreeing and indestructibly united, why are you not with me, your mercury belly pressed to my aluminum chest, both resting upon some rock by the shore and contemplating the view I love? Ancient ocean, whose waves are crystal, you resemble somewhat those azure marks to be seen on the bruised backs of cabin boys. You are an enormous bruise upon the earth's body. I like this analogy. So at first sight of you, a prolonged sigh of sadness passes which might be imagined the murmur of a suave breeze, leaving ineradicable traces upon the deeply moved spirit, and you recall to lovers' memories, often unknown to them, the crude origins of mankind, when it become acquainted with abiding sorrow. I salute you, ancient ocean, your harmoniously spherical form, which delights the solemn countenance of geometry, but too well recalls to me the tiny eyes of mankind, similar to those of the wild boar for smallness, and to those of night birds in the circular perfection of contour. Nevertheless, mankind has thought himself beautiful in all ages. But I imagine, rather, that mankind only believes in his beauty out of conceit, and that he is not actually beautiful and suspects it, for why does he look at the faces of his fellows with so much scorn? I salute you, ancient ocean, You are the symbol of identity, forever equal to yourself. You do not essentially change, and if your waves are wild in one place, far off in some other region, they are in utter calm. You are not like mankind, who stops in the street to watch two bulldogs seize each other by the neck, but does not stop when a funeral is passing, who is agreeable in the morning and bad-tempered in the evening, laughs today and cries tomorrow. I salute you, ancient ocean. It is not impossible that, as fabulous and futile utilities for mankind are hidden in your breast, already you have given him the whale. You do not easily allow the greedy eyes of natural science to divine the thousand secrets of your hidden organization. You are modest. Man prides himself without ceasing, and for trivialities, I salute you, ancient ocean. Ancient ocean, the diverse families of fish which you feed have not sworn brotherhood with each other. Each family keeps to itself. The temperaments and forms which vary in each of them explain satisfactorily what at first appears only an anomaly. So it is with man, who has not the same excuse. If a scrap of earth is inhabited by 30 million human beings, they think themselves bound not to interfere in the lives of their neighbors, fixed like roots in the adjoining scraps of earth. Descending from the great to the small, each man lives like a savage in his lair, rarely leaving it to visit his fellow, similarly crouched in another lair. The large universal family of humanity is a utopia worthy of the most mediocre logic. Besides, the sight of your fruitful dugs releases the idea of ingratitude, for one immediately thinks of all those numerous parents so ungrateful to the Creator as to abandon the fruit of their miserable union. I salute you, ancient ocean. Ancient ocean, your material grandeur can only be compared with the measure one imagines of how much active force was needed to engender the whole of your bulk. You can't be comprehended in a flash. To contemplate you, sight must turn its telescope in a continuous movement through the four quarters of the horizon, even as a mathematician, in resolving a problem, is obliged to examine individually each possible variant before he can settle the difficulty. Man eats nourishing things and makes other efforts worthy of a better fate to appear plump. Let this adorable frog swell as much as it wants. Be at peace. It will never equal your hugeness. At least I suppose not. I salute you, ancient ocean. Ancient ocean, your waters are bitter. They taste exactly like the bile which criticism distills upon art, science, everything. If one is a genius, he is made to pass for an idiot. If someone else has a beautiful body, he is made a frightful hunchback. Indeed, man must feel his imperfections strongly, 3 parts of which are due entirely to himself, to criticize himself thus. I salute you, ancient ocean. Ancient ocean, mankind, despite the excellence of his method, and assisted by scientific methods of inquiry, has not yet arrived at measuring the giddy profundities of your abysms. Some you have which the longest and heaviest sounding lines have admitted inaccessible. To fish it is permitted, not to man. Often have I asked myself which were the easier to discover, the ocean's depths or the heart of man. Often my hand to my forehead, standing on ships while the moon swung erratically between the masts, I have surprised myself abstracted to everything which was not the end I pursued, striving to resolve the difficult problem. Yes, which is the more obscure, the more impenetrable of the two, the sea or the human heart? If 30 years' experience of life may up to a certain point include the balance toward one or other of these solutions, it will be allowed me to say that despite the obscurity of the sea, it cannot toe the line, as far as this quality is concerned, with the obscurity of the human heart. I have had to do with men who have been virtuous. They died at 60, and no one hesitated to cry out. They did good upon the earth, that is to say, they were charitable. That's all. It was not malicious. Everybody can do as much. Who can understand why two lovers who idolized each other the day before for some misunderstood word will part stung by hatred, by revenge, by love, and by remorse? Each draped in his lonely pride, never to see the other more. It is a miracle which each day renews itself, and which is not the less miraculous. Who can understand why one relishes not only the general disgrace of one's fellows, but even the particular disgraces of one's nearest friends, though afflicted at the same time? An irrefutable example to close the series. Man hypocritically says yes and thinks no. That is why the young wild boars of humanity have so much trust in each other and are not egotistical. Psychology has still far to go. I salute you, ancient ocean. Ancient ocean, you are so powerful that mankind has learnt it to his cost. It might well employ all the resources of its genius. Incapable of dominating you, it has found a master. I say it has found something stronger than itself. This something has a name. That name is Ocean. You inspire him with such fear that he respects you. Despite that, you make his heaviest machines waltz easily, gracefully, and with elegance. You make them leap gymnastically to the sky and amazingly plunge to the very bottom of your realms. A clown would be jealous. They are happy if you do not ultimately wrap them in your frothing folds to go and see, without the help of a train, how the fish are in your watery entrails. Above all, how they themselves do. Man says, I am more shrewd than the sea. It is possible. It is even fairly true. But he is more afraid of the sea than the sea of him, and that it is unnecessary to prove. This watchful patriarch, coeval with the earliest epochs of our suspended sphere, smiles pitifully when he assists at the sea fights of nations. Behold 100 leviathans issued from the hands of humanity, the emphatic commands of superiors, the cries of the wounded, the shock of cannons, are noises expressly made to obliterate a few seconds. It seems that the drama is over and that the sea has put everything into its maw. Its jaws are frightful. It must be enormous toward the back in the direction of the unknown. Finally, to crown the stupid and not even interesting comedy, one sees some crane hung in the sky, belated by tiredness, which begins crying without interrupting the sweep of its flight. Hold, I find that disagreeable. In the distance there are black specks. I have closed my eyes. They are gone. I salute you, ancient ocean. Ancient ocean, majestic bachelor. When you survey the grave solitude of your phlegmatic kingdoms, justly you swell with pride at your own magnificence, and the truthful praises which I hasten to offer you, voluptuously swayed by the soft exhalations of your majestic deliberation, the most grandiose amongst the attributes with which the sovereign might have gratified you, centered in somber mystery, you spread out over all its sublime surface, your incomparable waves, with the calm feeling of your eternal might. They follow each other in parallel, separated by brief intervals. Hardly does one grow smaller when another goes to meet it, growing larger and accompanied by the melancholy noise of spume, which melts away to warn that all is spume. Thus, human beings, living waves, dying one after the other, monotonously, but without leaving a spumy noise. The bird of passage rests upon them confidently, and abandons itself to their movement, full of proud grace, until the bones of its wings have received the accustomed vigor to continue the aerial pilgrimage. I wish human majesty were not merely the incarnation of the reflection of your own. I ask a good deal, and this sincere wish is to your glory. Your moral grandeur, image of the infinite, is like the philosopher's reflections. Woman's love, birds' divine beauty, the poet's meditations. You are more beautiful than the night. Answer me, ocean, will you be my brother? Stir yourself impetuously, more, still more.
If you desire me to compare you to the vengeance of God, stretch your livid claws, clearing a path across your own bosom. Well done. Unroll your terrifying waves, hideous ocean, comprehended of myself alone, and before whom I fall prostrated on my knees. Man's majesty is borrowed. He will not impose upon me at all. You, yes, oh, when you advance, crest high and terrible, surrounded by your torturous foes, as though by a court, magnetic and ferocious, rolling your waves one upon the other, conscious of what you are, while from the deeps of your breast, and as though overcome by an intense sorrow which I am unable to penetrate, you utter that hollow bellowing so much feared of men, even though, breathing upon the shore, they regard you in safety. Then I see that the high right of calling myself your equal does not belong to me. That is why, before your superiority, I will devote all my love to you, and nobody knows how much love my aspirations toward the beautiful contain, if you did not make me think painfully of my fellows, who make the most ironical contrast with you, the most comical antithesis ever seen throughout creation. I cannot love you, I hate you. Why do I come back to you for the 1000th time, to your friendly arms, which half open to kiss my burning brow, which sees its fever vanish at their contact? I do not know your hidden destiny. Everything which concerns you interests me. Tell me, then, if you are the dwelling place of the Prince of Darkness. Tell me, ocean, only to me, so as not to sadden those who so far have but known illusions, and whether the breath of Satan makes the tempests which lift your salty waters to the clouds. You must tell me, because I would be happy to know hell so near mankind. I want this to be the last strophe of my invocation. Consequently, I want once again to hail you and say goodbye. Ancient ocean with crystal waves, my eyes moisten with abundant tears, and I have not the strength to continue, for I feel that the moment to go back among man of the brutal continents is come. But courage, let us make a great effort, and end with the sentiment of duty, our destiny upon this earth. Hail, ancient ocean. If it is sometimes logical to relate oneself to the manifestations of phenomena, this first canto would finish here. Do not be severe on him who but still tunes his lyre. Nevertheless, should you wish to be impartial, you will have received already a decided impression despite his imperfections. As for myself, I am setting to work again to produce within a not-too-delayed period of time a second canto. The decline of the 19th century will see its poet. All the same, to begin with, one should not start with a masterpiece, but follow the laws of nature. He was born on American shores, at the mouth of La Plata, there where two races, once rivals, now strive to surpass each other in material and moral progress. Buenos Aires, Queen of the South, and Montevideo, the coquette, hold out to each other friendly hands across the Argentine waters of the great estuary. But continual war has fixed his destructive empire upon the fields, and reaps with joy his numerous victims. Goodbye, old man. And if you have read me, think of me. Young man, do not despair, for despite your contrary opinion, you have a friend in the vampire. If you include the Sarcopterycus, which produces the oak gall, you will have two. End of Maldoror by Comte de Lautréamont, translated by John Rodker.
Gridale by John de Bosschère. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by RebeccaG. Gridale by John de Bosschère. Since Gridale has known that the sun is black, desire shines no more in his eyes. He lays no blame either on poets or mothers. His gaze comes from a bottomless night, like a garden whose ruined door unbears forever the immutable desert. The sun of darkness plunges into his eyes and is lost there. Who will arise and say that we do not live in the full light of day? Those who have never asked for divine aid, whose God is in the folds of their stomach, burst into laughter at Gridale's mask. His threadbare and useless soul is not worth a troll's wage. His really historical coat is nothing but a spider's web. Those who have a God sitting quietly on his broken chair, who is more simple and taciturn than he is idiotic, a God who understands nothing at all, like a speechless old man out of touch with things, who is addressed with too great earnestness, these threw stones at Gridale, and on each stone they wrote the name of the God, the image of tottering man, seated on his broken chair, who will arise and say that we do not live in the full light. Gridale set his teeth and did not cry out. He turned his eyes away from all but blind things, a few beetles and hens that were not bad, to which his eyes did not tell the senile colour of the true sun. And through the years which are the bricks of life, men disappear. They have given up doing as he did. They have disappeared from the mirror of his eyes. But he has not complained, for it was he who endowed himself with night, and not innocent, lying and cynical mothers, who will arise and say that we do not live in the full light. Now when Gridale broke down, ruined by thirst and hunger, they carried him to a bed out of charity. He is very handsome sleeping there with his closed eyes. He will make a fine statue when dead. And his nurse approached him with water and an orange. The eyelashes of the famished man quivered. His eyes opened. Night. The nurse fled. The glass is broken. Gridale is like a worn-out cord. A slave gave him a gun, and then pointed out to him men whom he must kill. But he reflected, and could not be sure where these men were separated from all that which is nothing. He asked whether it was true that these men were not himself. He asserted that he belonged to them, and that they belonged to him. The slave struck him and broke one of his bones, for he had looked into his eyes, into which the sun plunged and was lost, and he did not find there the images of slaves and popes. He struck him with a stick bearing the title of the trembling God seated on his broken chair. Then they shut him up in prison. Who will arise and say that we do not live in the full light of day? The jailer wore medals. He had killed a little black and white riffraff, who refused to believe that he was the bearer both of the Bible and death. And if Gridale is not blind, let him see the world as jailers see it. This man Gridale must be flayed. He has a black sun in his eyes. The jailer took away from him his mattress and his bandage. Then they cut off the broken bone of his leg, and as a divine recreation, the chaplain of the prison hung the cripple's bread high up on a peg. Through the wicket the jailers watched, the cripple jumping with outstretched hands towards the bread. But he did not cry out and scarcely set his teeth. He crossed the seas, went limping into other countries, but none knew who he was, without ever having seen him, for light here also enjoyed a good name. His hunger hollowed out another abyss in the abyss, and he was about to die, when a young man gave him some stew and a coat, and they set him to teach Latin to schoolboys. They had never asked God's aid. They did not know that there is a God sitting quietly on his broken chair. But they were afraid. They feared his eyes and his wooden leg. And when Gridale lowered his eyes, they sighed with ease, and they no longer looked at the crippled master. They bent their heads and murmured a certain vengeance of cries. A great clamour broke out. Books flew. Gridale fell. Blood flowed from his lips. This is indeed the day and the full light. He went away in the snow. His wooden leg dotted the way. At the end of his road he lay down in the snow to die. Then he sang, and being able to sing no longer, he murmured in his tears, and the god seated quietly on his broken chair opened his idiotic eyes and mouth which the larvae had given to him. But he never understands anything. Gridale sang. Ice closed his mouth in the night of noon. End of Gridale by John de Bosschère.
Lucifer and Starlight by George Meredith. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. On a starred night, Prince Lucifer uprose. Tired of his dark dominion, swung the fiend above the rolling ball in cloud part screened, where sinners hugged their spectre of repose. Poor prey to his hot fit of pride were those, and now upon his western wing he leaned. Now his huge bulk over Africa careened. Now the black planet shadowed Arctic snows, soaring through wider zones that pricked his scars with memory of the old revolt from awe. He reached a middle height, and at the stars, which are the brain of heaven, he looked and sank. Around the ancient track marched, rank on rank, the army of unalterable law. End of Lucifer and Starlight by George Meredith. End of Le A pour Le A.